All right, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're at. I'm assuming everybody here understands this afternoon, but just in case there's somebody in California or Hawaii, it's a good morning to them as well. So welcome to our first inaugural NABP Medication Safety Academy. I think everybody knows who I am, but just in case, I'm Reggie Dillard. I'm the current president of NABP, and I really am pleased to be here with you all today, and glad that you were able to make it in as well. The executive committee and I are certainly appreciative of the patience and the dedication and the time that you guys spend on taking care of the patient safety and the public health interest. So, thank you again for being here to take care of all that interest for the patient safety and spending the extra time to be here with us today. So we're holding this academy just from a recommendation from the task force that was named a task force on safety sensitive measures to review medication errors, which one of the first things we're going to do is start reducing the names of the task forces so that we don't have to have such a long task force name. But that was approved by the executive committee. And in line with that task force recommendations, this meeting was designed for boards of pharmacy and members to learn more about preventing medication errors and applying a just culture approach to increase patient safety and implementing continuous quality improvement programs. So we're hoping that this Medication Safety Academy will provide you with the knowledge about these issues and help supply you with the tools that you will find able to accomplish those goals. But before we begin, has anybody got any questions about NABP or the goals of this meeting? You understand what we're going to try to accomplish? You got questions about NABP? I'm sure somebody here can answer them. No? Nothing online? Hearing nothing? Anyway, okay. Thank you all. And now throughout this meeting, if you do wish to speak, now we're going to have microphones that I think we're going to be able to hand out here. So if you wish to speak, raise your hand here in person. And if you're online virtually, and you can raise your hand through the meeting through the Zoom meeting or whatever it is that we're on here today, so that the moderator or whoever's up here can recognize you. Now, those of you that are here in the room, we do ask that you use the microphone though, because when you are online, sometimes it's very difficult to hear what you're saying here in the room. While we can all hear it, they may not be able to hear it online. So we ask that you do wait until somebody can bring you a microphone before you start talking, ranting, or whatever it is that you want to do. Let's also wait for the moderator to recognize you before you start speaking. And then if you would, state your name and your affiliation before you address the group. We will be recording this, so whatever you say can be used against you in a court of law later on. As you know, when you run for president someday, everybody's going to hear what you said here today, so they may come back and use it against you. So just be aware that we are recording it, but we do want to record it so that we can share it with those people who were unable to attend, and they can get the benefit of all your wisdom and comments so that we can move forward with this. Now, after the forum, we're going to send you an email. It's going to have a link to a post-meeting survey, and we would appreciate your feedback, both positive and negative, and we'll use that to make improvements to the future meetings. But more importantly, if there's a negative, we certainly want to hear that, because we want to make sure that we get this right and we continue to do it right. You've got an expense form, a reminder about submitting that. Your instructions are included in the email that we sent you last week. Remember to send in your original itemized receipts. They won't pay you without original itemized receipts. So just be sure and send those in along with it. Before we start on this first topic today, though, I want to take a little time for everybody to introduce themselves. I think a lot of us know each other, but there are those that may not. So we're going to start. Where do we want to start at? How about we start over here with Maureen? And so we'll go around the room here and let everybody introduce themselves and who they're with, and we'll start over there. And then after we get everybody in the room introduced, we'll go online and let everybody introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. I'm Maureen Shank. I've communicated with many of you. Nice to see you all in person. Everybody made it. Yeah, this should be a great program. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Eileen Lewalski, NABP staff. Hi, Melissa Becker, NABP as well.
Jess Rule, NABP as well.
Lisa Janso, NABP.
Anastasia Shamtanis. I'm from the New Brunswick College of Pharmacists, which is equivalent to your boards here south of the border.
Hi, Janine Gaston, NABP staff.
For those of you that don't know your geography, Anastasia's from Canada. You did say it.
Hi, I'm Christy Cook, NABP staff.
Hi, I'm Rita Jew from the Institute for Safe Medication Practices.
Lenora Newsom, NABP President-elect and from Arkansas.
Good afternoon, Jessica Sapp, Executive Director for the Florida Board.
Good morning, good afternoon. Fred Weaver, Executive Committee, NABP.
Good afternoon, Jeff Massaris, NABP Treasurer from Florida.
Hello, I'm Gigi Levine with NABP.
Shelley Rosebrook, Compliance with the Kansas State Board of Pharmacy.
Tracy Collier, NABP Executive Committee and from South Carolina.
Good afternoon, everyone. Miguel Cornejo with the NABP staff.
Matt Martineau, the Executive Director from the Wyoming State Board of Pharmacy.
Good afternoon, Kim Grinston, Missouri Board of Pharmacy.
Good afternoon, Doug Sheckelhoff with the American Society of Health System Pharmacists.
Barbara Olson, and I'm with the Just Culture Company.
Nikki Chopsky, NABP Executive Committee from Idaho, and Executive for the Idaho Board of Pharmacy.
Hello, everyone. I'm Donna Horn. I'm past president of NABP from Massachusetts. Used to be with ISMP as well. And I was on the original task force that brought this meeting together. So I'm glad to see everyone here. So thank you for being here.
Brent Slaughter, North Carolina Board of Pharmacy.
Hi, good afternoon, Bill Cover with NABP.
Neil, tell them who you are too.
Neil Watson, NABP.
You can't hide in the corner. Now, I can't see the screen, so for the people that are online. So if anybody got that, can you just get them started, call them out? All right, Dina, I see you. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Dina Spades Napata, Executive Director, Maryland Board of Pharmacy.
All right. How do we get to the next person?
Hey, this is Caroline. Caroline Jern, Virginia Executive Director and NABP Chairperson. Sorry, I can't be there in person.
Hello, everyone. Brad Hamilton, NABP Executive Committee from the state of Maine.
Hi, this is Carrie Phillips, Executive Officer, Vermont. Wish I could be there, but got other things going on, but super happy to be here this way. Thanks for making this happen.
And I'll chime in, Christine Horn from New Hampshire, since how Maine and Vermont just went. I don't have a camera, but I'm here.
I'm Mitch Sobel, New Jersey Board of Pharmacy President. Again, wish I could be there, but we got a lot of snow on the ground.
Hi, Juliana Sweeney. I'm the Deputy Executive Director from Kentucky.
Hi, this is Jackie Hall with the Louisiana Board of Pharmacy.
Hello, Joe Schnabel from the Oregon Board of Pharmacy. It's sunny here, so I decided not to come out. Sorry.
Hi, Reggie. This is Debbie Mack from Arkansas Board of Pharmacy and also the EC Committee.
Hi, I'm Michelle McCreary, the Pharmacist Compliance Officer with the State of Delaware.
Jennifer Davis, Oregon Board of Pharmacy, Pharmacist Consultant.
Hi, I'm Jenny Way. I'm the Chief Pharmacist with the State of Ohio Board of Pharmacy.
Hi, Carrie Shannard Kunder, South Dakota Board of Pharmacy Executive Director.
Hey guys, John Curley from the Arkansas State Board of Pharmacy. Hate that I'm not there in person with you.
Who else we got?
Hi, I'm Mark Chan, a compliance officer from the College of Pharmacists of British Columbia here in Canada.
Hey everyone, Al Carter, I'm the Executive Director of NABP.
Unfortunately, I'm at home sick, so Reggie is filling in for me. I apologize for any statements that he makes. But thank you again, Reggie, and everyone there. I greatly appreciate you subbing in for me.
We were hoping you weren't going to be online because I was going to talk bad about you. So unfortunately, you're here.
Here.
Anyone else? It's amazing how many of you folks are in colder areas than there are here, and you managed to stay there instead of coming somewhere that could be slightly warmer anyway. Brad's got any more of those minus 114 degree wind chills up in Maine or not, but I would have left there that day. All right, anybody else left? Or we got everybody introduced? There will not be a quiz. So but we do all want you to get to know who's here and get to know each other just a little bit better. So now that you do know who is on, though, I hope you'll feel comfortable about sharing your thoughts and your ideas and be interactive and work through this academy so that we can all learn and come up with better ideas on how to deal with the medication safety issue that we're talking about. So anyway, we'll get started with our first session. Which says right here, our first session. Read it. Today our first session is just the numbers, overview of medication errors. And before we can implement any of the solutions, we've got to understand the problems. So during this session, we'll discuss the current state of medication errors in healthcare practice, specifically in the community and hospital pharmacy practice. And speaking to you here today is Rita Jew, president of the Institute of Safe Medication Practices. And I'll invite her to the podium and she can share her insights with you. Rita? Welcome.
Thank you, Reggie. And good afternoon and good morning. Still in the West Coast for anyone who might be there. I didn't hear any California people, so I guess it's. Oh, yeah, that's right. Oregon. Yes. Okay. Well, thank you again for inviting me to come and talk with you all. The title is a little misleading. We will talk a little bit about numbers, but for the most part, we're going to be talking about medication errors, the errors that are reported to ISMP. So there we go. Before we get started, for those of you who might not know, the Institute for Safe Medication Practices, or we all call ourselves as ISMP. ISMP was founded in 1994 by the legendary Michael Cohen. Those of you who practice pharmacy hopefully would all know who Michael Cohen is. ISMP is the only 501c nonprofit organization that is devoted entirely to preventing medication errors. And even though we're dealing with medications, we are definitely not a pharmacist-only organization. We are a very multidisciplinary team with pharmacists, nurses, and even a medical director. And back in 2008, when the PSO legislation first came out, we were certified as a patient safety organization by the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. And then most recently, in January of 2020, we actually got affiliated with another nonprofit organization called ECRI or ACRI. That is what we call it now. And ACRI is a patient safety organization as well as a nonprofit organization as well. Their focus is on safety on medical devices for the most part. That's where they're rooted from. And they still maintain a very active network of medical device reporting errors and issues reporting system. So you can imagine the two organizations merging together is actually very powerful in helping us solve a lot of patient safety issues. And for ISMP, it really helps kind of boost up our expertise in medications related technology and devices, for example. So soon after the affiliation, we also merged our patient safety organization. And now back in September of 2020, we became the ACRI and ISMP PSO. So our mission, again, as we have said, is advancing patient safety worldwide by empowering healthcare community to prevent medication errors. Preventing medication errors is our passion. And we do that by working with a multidisciplinary team in collecting and analyzing reports of medication-related errors and hazardous conditions that are reported to ISMP. And we get information not just of actual medication errors, but we get a lot of reports on near misses and potential errors as well. Just to give you an example, for example, when most recently there was a potassium chloride, concentrated potassium chloride product that was made. It's always been pharmacy, it's a pharmacy bulk pack bottle, glass bottles that is used for compounding that is made by the manufacturer. And then because of some manufacturing difficulties with glass bottles, they switched over to an IV bag, basically, of these concentrated electrolytes. I cannot tell you how many reports we've gotten over that week when the product was launched to tell us that this is potentially such a hazardous situation that people are going to die from potassium chloride inadvertently being given through those that IV bag, because it could be mistaken as a regular IV bag for just fluid replacement. So that's also, besides actual medication errors, we also get a lot of the potential hazards and near misses that is reported to us. So we disseminate these information through a lot of different mechanisms. And you will see that we have what we call a NAN alert, which is a network of a few different organizations, including the American Society of Health System Pharmacists, where we would push out hazardous situation to folks and make sure that they are aware of that. But we also put out a regular newsletters in acute care setting, in the ambulatory and community setting for long-term care, for consumers, and I'm missing one, for nurses. Yes. And so all of these errors that are reported to us, we will write them into safety briefs, and we want to make sure that people are aware of some of these hazards or gaps, safety gaps that could potentially trip up people and making an error. And at the same time, we also put out recommendations of how to prevent these errors from happening. We do a lot of education of the healthcare community and consumers, just really on error prevention, making them aware of some of the safety hazards and educating them on how to prevent them. But more importantly, we collaborate with all kinds of organizations, from patient safety organizations to government organizations such as the FDA. As a matter of fact, right after this presentation, I'll have to sneak out for a call with the FDA. We have a monthly call with the FDA where we go over a lot of the hazards that we have, or actual errors that we have collected, things that we wanted to highlight with them that the FDA can potentially have an impact on. And over the years, we have impacted a lot of changes through the FDA to try to prevent medication errors from happening. We also collaborate with other professional organizations and accreditation agencies and everybody else who's interested in talking to us in preventing medication errors. And by the same token, with advocacy is we advocate with everyone on adopting safe medication standards. And so with those kind of work, we work closely with folks like the Joint Commission, and we would love to work closely with NABP to try to promote safe medication practices. And finally, we also conduct evidence-based safe medication practices research to try to advance safe use of medications. So a little history about where ISMP came from is really rooted from, again, our founder, Michael Cohen, started writing a column in the hospital journal, hospital pharmacy journal in March of 1975. This is where he saw errors, medication errors happening, and he wants to inform everyone about the potential hazards. And so he started writing these journal column, and I have heard stories of how excited he is. Back in those days, the only way he encouraged people to report these medication errors. And the only way they can reach him is by mailing him a letter. So every day, Michael will go up to the mailbox and he'll be so excited to get these letters because those are his materials to start writing about medication errors. And I remember as a student, reading the column on some of the illegible handwriting of prescriptions and those kind of things that he put out in the column. And so what he does, besides just having people send him information, he will reach out directly to these folks to talk to them if he has questions about what happened. And so he would start writing about this. So this is how ISMP has really started. And to this date, we continue to do that. When errors get reported to us, we will reach out, especially some of the errors that are very concerning. We will reach out to the reporter to try to get more information, to try to understand the root cause of that. We write that up in our newsletter, we distribute it, and we wanted to make sure that people are aware of these potential hazards. And we also put out recommendations on how you can prevent these errors from happening. So as I say, we have impact both on the product and practice issues and the safety culture. And our recommendations are really well respected and acted upon just by healthcare practitioners, especially in the acute care setting, when folks will be quoting our guidelines as they're implementing practices. And we've been told that when we put out these guidelines, it actually can get the attention of senior leadership so they can implement some of these safe practices. And definitely our guidelines have been adopted and endorsed by regulatory and accredited agencies. Well, one thing you all need to know is that our funding sources is we don't get any government funding. All of our fundings came from subscriptions to our newsletters, consultations that we do out there, and unrestricted educational grants and honorariums and charitable donations. So much about, since medication error reporting is kind of where we're rooted from, this is still something that is very prominent in our website. And this is where you can see that the error is there. Okay, this is on our website there. If you click on our error reporting program in here, you will then get to either reporting as a consumer or health care practitioners. So obviously, reporting as a consumer will get you directly to our reporting page. If you're a healthcare practitioner, then the next page you'll see is either reporting a medication error or reporting a vaccine error. We actually were fortunate to get a grant from the California Department of Health to establish a vaccine reporting program, which is still very active right now. So during COVID, when there was all kinds, as more and more COVID vaccine came out and more errors were experienced, we have just a huge rise in the amount of medication vaccine errors that were reported to us that I'll be sharing with you in a little bit. So that's the background information. So again, as I say, I will be focusing mainly on errors that in reaching patients in the community pharmacies. And we'll talk about, so I'm showing you some data on consumers' medication error reports because they're very similar to practitioner reports. So we have practitioners that report errors that happens in the community setting. For the most part, the consumers report pretty much mirror what the healthcare providers in the community settings are reporting to us. So I'm taking an excerpt of some of our consumer medication error report to show you what just a select examples of what some of these errors look like. And then we'll go to talk about vaccine errors, since in the majority of the community setting now, folks are administering vaccines, and the vaccine errors that we see through the vaccine error reporting program, half of them comes from the community or in immunization centers and all. So you can, and all of these errors pretty much, you see it from one setting, you see it in another setting. So those are the two big groups of errors that I wanted to share with you. So this is one of two slides that you'll see numbers. Everything else, you're not going to see numbers. Topping the top 10 consumer errors reported, topping the list is vaccination errors. We have 174 reports. So just to give you the lay of the land, this is actually a compilation of a couple of years worth of reporting. We average about 300 to 400 reports from consumers. So we are not, obviously, this is voluntary reporting. And so we're really not looking at high numbers. We're really looking at the quality of the report, things that we can really dive into and act on. So the numbers you're seeing definitely is the tip of the iceberg. It's definitely not reflective of what actually happens. We do believe that what actually happens is much, much higher than what you're seeing in here. So vaccine errors, and then followed by patients getting shorted for medications, mostly controlled substances, but some of them are non-controlled substances. Right patient, right medication name and dose on label, but wrong medication in the container. Right patient, right medication name and dose on label, but wrong dosage in the container. You see some examples of that, both of these. Random pill or pills in the container. This really baffled me, and we have not been able to figure out why there will be random pills in. So patients will report that they get a bottle of pills that is right, except that they're mixed in there. There is some random pills. There might be one or two. And my hypothesis is that it's probably from technology, but we have not been able to identify the real root cause of that. Given another person's medication, suspension not reconstituted, and then a few sprinkles of wrong directions on the label, some non-community pharmacy errors. Those are from some health centers or homes, basically juvenile homes or such, and device related, and these are all medication device related reports. So this is an error that was reported to us about 3 months ago. Prasugrel versus methotrexate. This patient refilled a 90-day supply for the Prasugrel, your antiplatelet medication, and notice then that the pills look different, but it was in the same bottle as usual. You can see this bottle look pretty similar to what, it's like the blue cap bottle, the usual same brand bottle. Since then, he have felt bad and continually have gotten worse. He has lost hair. He has not been feeling, he's just been feeling very tired, and he was just not himself. Arm and joint pain and a ton of other problems. So one day, this is almost 2.5 months after he's refilled the medication, as he was filling his weekly medication tray, the medication boxes, he asked his wife about the label on the medication being a different milligram. And that's when she noticed that he was actually taking methotrexate 2.5 milligrams. So this is what happens. This is the label in the back. So the label says the right thing. Prasugrel, 10 milligrams, take 1 tablet. So he's thinking, well, the tablet looks different, but bottle is the same. It's probably a different brand, whatever it might be. So he's been taking that until he's like, wait, but this says 2.5 milligrams. And he did not notice that it was the wrong drug until his wife pointed it out. So he reported the error. So he's practically been taking methotrexate once a day for almost 3 months. And that explained all of the problems that he was having. And of course, he then went follow up with his doctor. They were doing blood work. And when we follow up with him, he was still not himself. Obviously, a few weeks after he stopped taking the methotrexate that he's not supposed to take. But the other important part is, guess what? He's also not taking his Prasugrel that he's supposed to take. And he could potentially have a cardiac event during this time when he was taking the wrong medication. So this is an example of the right label with the right drug and the right everything, but the wrong drug was given to the patient. Another example of methotrexate being substituted for torsemide this time. And these are all recent errors that I'm telling you. These are all within the last 6 months of the errors. It is really troubling to us to see methotrexate being dispensed to patients when they're not supposed to get it that frequently, right? And again, these are all voluntary reports. If we see a couple of cases, that means a lot more could be happening out there. Another example, I've been taking risperidol for 2.5 weeks, and I'm supposed to be taking Requip for restless leg syndrome. And I have been suffering from the extreme side effects from the Risperdal. So this patient just realized after 2.5 weeks that it was the wrong medication. You can see how easily, because of the kind of look-alike brand name, that this could be mistaken, right? Next one, my husband picked up multiple prescriptions for me from the pharmacy. When I opened the bottle of meloxicam, I noticed a small ovoid purple-colored pill in the bottle. Meloxicam is larger. Now, this is a pretty sophisticated patient that actually realized that, okay, my meloxicam is supposed to be large, round, and yellow. And he looked up the pill online and found that it was colchicine. Again, this is one pill mixed in with the rest of them. Now, this is different enough that patients may pick it up. But when you think about this, there will be plenty of times when you have an elderly person who might not be able to see very well if the tablet or the cap, whatever it is mixed in, is very similar in size and color. They may not be able to pick it up. Or even if it is different, when you're talking about an elderly who is trying to take their own medications, they might not even put 2 and 2 together and say, wait, this pill looks different, right? So this is really concerning that there is random pills that are mixed into the bottle of the right medications. Okay, another one. In refilling a prescription, the pharmacy dispensed 25 milligram tablets of metoprolol instead of 15 milligrams. Labeling on the bottle was correct. The pills inside were not. Again, you have to give it to the patient that they actually notice the difference. And my father takes metoprolol. I can tell you that there's just a slight size difference between the 25 and the 50 milligram tablets. They're all the same color. And the fact that they picked up that it was the wrong dosage was good. Again, a blood pressure medication, half the dose. You can imagine what potential adverse events that could happen. Now, most people think that when the pharmacist did not reconstitute a powder antibiotic, it's no big deal. People will bring it back and it's probably an oversight and it's not a big deal. Well, this is an example of an amoxicillin clavinalic acid that was dispensed as a powder and not as a liquid. And the husband of this reporter didn't know it was supposed to be premix. And so he was being a good father and read the PI, tried to follow the directions to mix, and I was just reading that and I was like, oh my gosh, I just can't even imagine how he was doing that and how he was trying to figure out the dose. So it almost sounds like that he didn't mix the whole thing, but he just take out part of the powder and mix it in something. And it was, of course, the patient threw up in 3 times. And again, you have to give it to him. He tried 3 different times to try to give his child the medication that he's supposed to get, the child is supposed to get. So these are all very puzzling examples. And these are just select examples. We have multiple of these examples in our database that we see on a regular basis. One would have to stop and ask, why are these errors happening? It can't be because of bad people, right? And we know that most of the time patients get the right medications. But if there is 1% chance that the patient is getting the wrong medication, is a lot of wrong medications the patients are getting. And this is where ISMP has been trying really hard over the years to work and partner with community pharmacies to try to implement best practices and try to help improve patient care. But what we have come to realize is because regulations, there's really nothing similar to where in the acute care setting where there's accreditation agencies, the Department of Health, that goes for regular visits that folks have to comply with a lot of the safety guidelines. And as a matter of fact, in the acute care setting, folks will be using our guidelines for accreditation purposes. And so you do get compliance to some of the guidelines. But in the community setting, unfortunately, there's really not very tight control, and hence there is very loose following of safety guidelines. If you go back and think about let me just flash back at some of these examples and ask you, wrong drug dispensed with the right label, wrong drug dispensed to a different person, wrong mixed up of 2 drugs, well, wrong strength of the drug. We know that in the community setting, almost everyone has barcode scanning in the software right now, right? And as I talk to folks in the community, they will tell me that absolutely, we use the scanning, we scan the bottles. The chain stores will tell me that, well, yeah, they are watching if we're scanning, so we do the scanning. So but then we have to realize that technology by itself is not going to be foolproof. When human interacts with technology, that's when things can break down, right? So you can scan the bottle, but if you scan multiple bottles, have multiple labels lying on the counter, can you see how easily it is that you have the right bottles on your counter? You have 5 right bottles, 5 right labels on the counter, but you can just swap it out very easily and make mistakes that way, right? So this is where if we don't implement technology the right way, and the right way to do this is really you scan, you got a label, if you scan the label, you scan the barcode of the drug and you slap the label on, then there won't be any mistakes. But if you start doing bulk scanning and then bulk labeling in batches, that's when mistakes happen, right? So because we're seeing more and more of these issues happening, we have decided last year that we pulled together, we have a grant funding actually that helps support us put together best practices for community pharmacies. ISMP has for the last probably over 10 years published medication safety best practices for hospitals. This is the first time we're publishing best practices for community pharmacies. And we really, and I was talking to Mike Cohen this morning, and the first thing he said to me is, you're going to tell them about the best practices, right, today. And so here I am, definitely wanting to make sure that you are aware. These are the best practices. The fancy publication is going to be posted on our website probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks. But we have finalized the best practice. The first and foremost is a standard protocol to verify patient identity using 2 patient identifiers. And here's where we get very specific on you wanted to have 2 patient identifier when you're receiving the prescription to be filled, responding to a patient questions, providing filled prescriptions to the patient at the point of sale, and when you're delivering the prescriptions to the patient home or prior to administration of vaccines or other treatments. Every single one of these steps, if you don't use 2 patient identifier, that's when the wrong patient received the wrong medication. So we thought this has to be one of the best practices that we roll out with this inaugural best practice for community pharmacies. We have decided that we don't want to overwhelm folks, so we only have 5 best practices that we roll out this year. And we are going to try to add on to that every 2 years, just like in our best practices for hospital. And so we'll give people opportunity throughout the next 2 years to try to implement some of these best practices. Again, folks do sometimes use, you know that when you go to the pharmacies, there will be 2 identifiers, but then they might not be at every single one of these points that we're talking about. And that's what we're really trying to emphasize on. The second best practice is installing and using barcode verification. Now, I just told you that we know that most community pharmacies have barcode scanning technology, but the problem is whether they're scanning every bottle, the process of the scanning to improve safety. And what we were appalled to hear is that most pharmacies, while they do have barcode scanning capability, vaccines are not in the system. And that explained why there's so many vaccines mixed up, right? So we want to make sure that we call out the fact that this is not just for medications, but also for vaccine packages or containers that is used for administration of vaccines. The third best practice is on methotrexate. And this is really adopting a best practice from the hospital setting and applying and making changes to apply it to the community setting. Use a weekly dosage regimen default for oral methotrexate in your electronic systems when medication orders are entered, so then it won't be inadvertently put in as a daily, which is what we see a lot of. Requiring verification and entry of appropriate oncological indication for daily orders. So making it a hard stop for someone to have to stop and think, okay, if this is a daily methotrexate, what is it for? Creating a forcing function to ensure that every oral methotrexate prescription is reviewed with the patient or a family member. We actually, as I was going through some of the errors, I can tell you that we also have a handful of errors where the patient just misunderstood how to take the medication and was taking the methotrexate daily, even though they're supposed to be taking it once a week. And then providing specific patient and our family education for all oral methotrexate prescriptions. So we're very passionate about methotrexate because this is something that is so preventable, and yet this is something that keeps tripping people up. And the consequences is really bad when patients are taking it on a day. We have had patients dying from taking daily doses of methotrexate. The fourth best practice is on standardizing to the use of milliliters unit of measure when prescribing, dispensing, and measuring oral liquid medications. And again, this is something that we've been advocating for a long time. And by this time, we would expect that everyone should be using metric system, but there's still a lot that are not. And the last one is really more on infrastructure. And this is where I was having a big debate. If you ask me, I am a pediatric and a neonatal pharmacist by training. And I was debating with my team that having a wait for patients for drugs that require a wait for, it should be our 5th best practice, but they convinced me that seeking out and using information about medication safety risk and errors that occurred outside of your pharmacy and, all other affiliated pharmacies and taking action to prevent these errors should really be something that we start advocating for, that folks should be looking at, first of all, learning from their own errors, but also looking on the outside to make sure that they are stopping and thinking, wait, someone made a mistake on that. Wait, this might happen with us. And what are we doing to prevent these errors from happening? So the ISMP team convinced me that this is a much more important one. We don't want to roll out too many best practices to overwhelm folks, but I can guarantee you that the next iteration of these best practices will have a weight on that as a best practice. I'm going to stop and see if there's any questions before I jump into the vaccine error reporting. Okay, no questions, I'll keep going. Okay, this is just second slide with numbers. We have last year, as I was perusing our error database, a little over 1,000 vaccine related errors reported to us, 1,100 plus. You can see that 25% of them was expired vaccines. Followed closely is the wrong vaccine. Oops. This should be wrong age, not wrong age, sorry. Underdose, extra dose, overdose, wrong route, diluent. I mean, we see the last two, diluent given without vaccine. It's like when you have 2 vaccine vials, one with the powder, one with the diluent. We've seen over and over again, people giving the diluent without diluting the powder, without putting the diluent in the powder before they give it to the patient. Or if you have 2 component vaccines, that they only give 1 component. There is the other 2 categories is lower on the list is wrong route. Wrong patient is one of them. Now I'm blanking out on the last one. There is a few of them. But these are the majority of the vaccine errors that we're seeing. Again, if we get these reports and these numbers, just think about what's happening out there. So there's a lot let me just go back very quickly and talk about expired vaccines. Expired vaccines could be because there's a lot of root causes to that. It could be because they're not kept in the right temperature. So during COVID, there's a lot of vaccines that were not, especially back in the early days when you're supposed to take it from deep freeze to the refrigerator and give it an expiration dating. And then if it's room temperatures, a different dating. A lot of expired vaccine errors was from that. There's also obviously vaccines that were stored inappropriately, just in the wrong place, or the refrigerator went out, they didn't realize that. There is a good handful of these expired vaccines is people are just not looking at expiration dating and getting rid of those vaccines out there. But there is also these confusions. You look at this, 13 DEC 12. What is this? December 13, 2012 or December 12, 2013? We don't know. How about this one? Okay, we can't see it. Sorry. Don't worry. It says 19 June 18. is what it says. So it could be June 19, 2018 or June 18, 2019. So there are definitely some expired vaccines that was given to patients because of these confusions where they thought it was 2019, but it was actually 2018. So I'm glad to tell you that USP has the General Chapter 7 on labeling. How can we, there we go. Actually, it's going to be effective September of this year, where there are special instructions for manufacturers to list the expiration dating. So it will be year, month, and date. And if they are putting out a month in alphabet, it has to be at least 3 alphabets. So you won't be confused as to what those alphabet means. And so this will be effective September 1st, 2023, this year, where all the manufacturers will have to comply with it. At least then it would decrease some of the confusion and hopefully decrease some of these expired medications, vaccines or medications. This applies to both vaccines and medications. So hopefully we can, and again, this is, Mike Cohen sits on this committee actually, and you can imagine how actively he's advocating for some standards on this. Wrong vaccine. I think it says wrong vaccine. Thank you, wrong age. COVID-19 example. Okay. If anybody have seen the COVID vaccine, you would, the labeling of that and the various iterations in the different brands, you will not be amazed that we have a ton of errors from COVID vaccine. Wrong vaccines or wrong age. So people have gotten Moderna vaccines when they're supposed to be getting the Pfizer vaccine. They're not that different in the labeling. They have gotten, the pediatric patients have gotten the adult vaccine. Now there is even 3 different age groups that they're supposed to be getting different types of vaccines. All these, well, one of our fellows actually help us gather all these labels and put it together so we can put them all on the same page and show it. And if you're looking at this, is like, even when you're trying to look really hard, it's difficult for you to figure out which vaccine is what. And if people are not using barcode scanning to try to differentiate them, it is not surprising that we're getting all these vaccine errors, right? And this is with the 3 age groups that is out now. These numbers would just keep coming. We have not slowed down on the COVID vaccine errors that are getting reported to us. That is the scary thing. There. Now, did it go too far? Hold on. There, yes. Okay, so when the bivalent vaccine came out, this is another one of those times when we're like, oh my God, how are people going to differentiate the bivalent vaccine from the regular monovalent vaccine? You look at this, they look just about exactly the same, except for a little like bivalent that you can see on the side. The bivalent is right up here. If you don't pay a lot of attention, all you can see is the Pfizer BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine versus here. There's very minimal difference in the labeling. Again, if you don't scan the barcode to try to identify what vaccine you're giving, you can see how easily things can get mixed up. So last year, when we finally are starting to get COVID vaccine and the flu vaccine at the same time, we knew that we actually was putting out an alert to tell people, be careful with your flu versus COVID vaccine, because patients are coming in to get flu vaccines and COVID vaccines. We have patients who we actually have to issue a NAN alert about this because we're seeing so many mix up. Patients getting 2 doses of COVID vaccine, patients getting 2 doses of flu vaccine, patients who are supposed to get the flu vaccine and got the COVID vaccine, patients who are supposed to get COVID vaccine and got the flu vaccine. Any of those combinations you can imagine, they have gotten. We actually have a very interesting one from one of our colleagues where they went to the pharmacy to try to get the flu vaccine, and they asked the pharmacist, "You're giving me the flu vaccine, right?" "Yes." Got the shot. Just when he was ready to leave, the pharmacist go, "Oh my gosh, I just gave you a COVID vaccine." This, when you're giving both, when there's both around, again, this could be easily solved with barcode scanning, right? And we always teach, and this is when we go out and teach patients, don't ask those questions. And like I am teaching my family members. I'm like, when you go and get the vaccine, ask them, what are you giving me? Don't ask them, are you giving me the Moderna vaccine? They're going to say yes, because they're so busy and they think they're giving you the Moderna vaccine. If you would stop and ask them, then hopefully they'll look and tell you what it is and stop the error from happening. When you're just asking a yes or no answer, the answer is going to be yes. And unfortunately, in this case, this is a pharmacist asking the question to another pharmacist, and this pharmacist still got the wrong vaccine. Question.
Thank you, Rita. That's a really good point. And I wanted to say that you could go a step even further, which is what we have been recommending, and that is to ask the pharmacist or ask the medical professional, if you're getting vaccines for your children in the doctor's office, if you can please see the syringe before or the label before. And I did that when I got my vaccine at Walgreens, and she was very happy to show me which vaccine she was giving me. So they're very accommodating. They will do that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Donna. And as a matter of fact, we advocate that the patients partner with the providers and just do the double checking of the vaccines when the vaccine is being administered. Yes, unfortunately, we're still seeing a lot of unlabeled vaccines. I see that all the time in the chain stores when you go in and someone will take out especially like with the unit dose vaccine, the individual dosing, you can see the manufacturing label, but when it is something that needs to be drawn up, like the COVID vaccine, there's so many times when not even the label is on these vaccines, unfortunately. So yeah, the first thing we advocate for is label your vaccines even if you're just walking out from your counter to the patient to give it, you should be labeling your vaccine so you can look at it and double check and tell the patient, I'm giving you the flu vaccine. Is that correct? Right? When you don't have a label on the syringe, it is hard to do that double checking. So definitely, these are all examples of wrong vaccines. And now, the age-dependent formulations of the same vaccine happens all the time. Hepatitis A, hepatitis B, the pediatric version versus the adult version, the adult getting the pediatric version, pediatric getting the adult version of the vaccine. We have a ton of those examples. Same thing with the influenza, adult version and pediatric version. Now onto the two-component vaccines. While you're not seeing a ton of it because we're overwhelmed by a lot of these other types of errors during COVID, back in the days before COVID, this is kind of the top of what we see is the two-component vaccine where one component is given, again, as I was telling you, if there's a diluent involved, sometimes the diluent is given to the patient and the powder is still sitting around in the fridge somewhere and causing these errors. So this one is the vaccine and the Shingrix vaccine that are the two-component vaccine. This one happens all the time. Also, Pentacell, where it's a 5-component vaccine where you see that the AdHib in here is one of the components and the other component is the other 4 components of the vaccine. You're supposed to mix them together. Plenty of times when patients will only get one or the other. So I'm happy to tell you that we have been nagging people so much that one of the vaccine manufacturers actually has now combined their 2 component vaccines into 1 component, and it should be out, I think, shortly this year, as the rotavirus vaccine that in the past you're supposed to use the syringe to mix the powder, and now it all comes in 1 syringe, 1 component. The same thing when the meningococcal vaccine is all going to be 1 vial instead of 2 vials. This is going to decrease some of the errors from happening. But this is what Mike Cohen and I talk about all the time. Why can't, if you really need to have 2 components, why can't people do something like Solu-Madro? We know that there's still errors happen to Solu-Madro, where there's still times when people just draw up these liquid, but it is pretty obvious in here that people can stop and think, if you would just push this stopper down and mix the 2 vaccine and make it 1 component, like the 2 component in 1, maybe this is what we have been suggesting to the manufacturers to help solve some of the problems. So they don't have to come up with new formulations, and maybe they will just have to come up with new packaging to solve the problem. Wrong route. So we know that one of the rotavirus vaccine is very easy, is very clear this is not an injectable vaccine, but the other brand of the rotavirus vaccine, you can see up here, these 2 are injectable items, and this is the oral vaccine. If you put them side by side, you can see why people were giving something that is supposed to be given orally as an injection. This happens. This does happen. It's not once or twice that this has happened. This has happened multiple times that we have gotten reports of. So wrong route, errors. And the other thing we advocate a lot of is documenting vaccines before, like the lot number and actually pulling up the patient record and documenting the vaccines lot number and expiration first, and then go and administer the vaccine, and then document the administration after the administration. The reason for that is because we have so many reports of people just doing the documentation after the fact and then realize they made a mistake. And so our thought is always, if you would do the documentation, you will see that you're making a mistake, and you'll stop yourself before you actually make that mistake. But then there's also problems with, even when, in the best case scenario, when folks are following the process, we have immunization information systems that are available individually in all 50 states, managed by different states. Wouldn't it be nice if we have a national organization to maintain the vaccine records, so then we don't have some disjointed records? We have had reports of where patients were getting vaccines, certain vaccines in another state, and then went to the provider's office, got the same vaccine because there was no record of the vaccine that they can pull up in that state record. And then after the fact, they got the record and realized that the patient was getting too many doses of the vaccine. Okay, so I thought I would just end my presentation with this lovely chart of all of the things that could ever happen with the COVID vaccine. I didn't expect you to study all of them, but basically, you can imagine that it happens. Pfizer vaccine that's supposed to be diluted, patients were getting the undiluted vaccine. The wrong amount of diluent that is put into the vaccine. The wrong dose, because the Pfizer vaccine is 1 dose and the Moderna vaccine is a different volume. People get them mixed up all the time. Patients are supposed to get the Moderna vaccine and went in and got the Pfizer vaccine instead, and vice versa. Patients who are not old enough to get the vaccine at some point where the vaccines were not approved. Younger patients were getting the vaccines when they're not supposed to. Younger patients were getting the adult vaccines when they're supposed to get the pediatric vaccine. To the point that we also have in the mass vaccine sites where people were very good at batching the process. We have had air injected into patients because the people who is preparing those vaccine syringes were trying to draw up air before they inject it into the vial and draw things up. So there was a bunch of syringes with air drawn up that was labeled, and folks pick it up and start injecting the patient with air instead of vaccines. We have air injected into concentrated vaccines. That means that the vaccine is really not diluted, instead of diluent getting injected into the vials. So anything you can imagine, especially with all this complications. So we have put out a lot of guidances and recommendations on how people can safeguard the process, but the COVID vaccine errors just kind of highlight some of the things that we've been seeing for a long time with vaccine errors. And vaccines, just about almost all of these vaccines are given now in the community setting. And you can imagine that the things that we get reports of from the doctor's office are the same kind of mistakes that are happening in the community setting. So with that, I can entertain questions.
Nikki.
Thank you for your presentation, Rita. Appreciate it. The point of your presentation was to help us understand the problem, and I think certainly your slides and your presentation does that. Because you have to leave to go take another call, and I don't see ISMP anywhere else on our schedule for today or tomorrow. I think the best practices for community pharmacy publication that's on the verge of forthcoming is going to be helpful. I would ask that you tell Mr. Cohen that it'd be great if ISMP had something like that, a resource for boards. So as we sit in this room today, and part of why we're here is because as boards, we reach out to ISMP as a resource, and sometimes we hear, well, we've got a lot of resources for this type of pharmacy or that type of pharmacy. I'm like, I'm not a pharmacy, I'm a board. And so I would just maybe put it on the vision list or the what's out there for demand. I mean, I think that's kind of what brought us here today is we ended up with the task force with NABP, and then we ended up at this conference. And I think, we are learning more, and we're going to hear more about the Just Culture company, which I didn't know existed when we started our journey. But I know as Missouri's going to, we're going to hear from Missouri tomorrow from Kim about the early work that Missouri did. I know there just weren't a lot of resources out there for regulators. And so I appreciate your presentation, but if you could, I guess, send back a message that there's another group of us out here that have needs, and we're not necessarily an organization. I mean, we are an organization, but we can't just do a gap analysis and find out how close we are to being more safe for the regulators. And so if there was a resource that ISMP had for regulators, it would be fabulous.
I would definitely bring back to my team and work on some resources. I think what you all can take back is that at the very minimum, if you can start enforcing the best practices that we put out, that will be helpful. And then we can certainly start dialogues on how, as inspectors are going out to look at pharmacies, what are they supposed to be looking at? And what are some of the highlights of things that you may wanted to see if people are using technology right, or are they really following the best practices? We definitely can talk more about creating resources.
Just a real quick follow-up on that. Donna's back. I was going to say this and she wasn't here, but now she's here and I'm still going to say it. The methotrexate example that you gave is shocking and heartbreaking and horrible. And when we had our I sat on the same task force that Donna sat on, and Anastasia was there too. And we heard about, Donna talked about these being never events, and I'd be interested to hear what ISMP would have for recommendations to boards of pharmacy for never events, like how, and when you talk about enforcing best practice, this group of people, enforcement equals writing a law or a rule in a book, which sometimes takes the state legislature, sometimes takes literally an act of state Congress to get that done. And so I think hopefully what we're going to hear throughout the rest of this afternoon and all of tomorrow before we have to go is what we can do, maybe without having to write a rule and maybe with having to write rules. So I just enforcing best. I wish you could be here later or longer. Maybe I'll just take your email and your number
for the rest of the day.
Okay,
So
perfect.
During break and all, I'd be happy to have more conversations with all of you. Yeah, I wish I could stay too.
That'd be great, because I've got a couple more thoughts, but I don't want to take up all the time, and we got other
Yeah,
presentations. so-
definitely. Yes, happy to engage in the conversation.
Anastasia, you have the mic. I'm going to go to you. And I think Caroline online has her hand up, and Jess will come to you as soon as we get through those. Okay. But go ahead.
Hi, it's Anastasia from New Brunswick, Canada. So we, the colleges equivalent to the boards, work directly with ISMP Canada. And really the focus for us, the enforcement is actually the appreciation and understanding of continuous quality improvement, and actually demonstrating how the value of the data that's produced. And so we actually partner with them, and they analyze provincial data. So the CQI is a really big component in that culture piece before the enforcement. And I guess my other question is around, you talked a little bit about the majority of them are near misses that are reported. Do you track?
No, actually, some of them are near misses, but not the majority.
Do you track that in terms of harm level?
No, it's a lot more difficult for us to track the harm level because we get a lot of times, it depends on the reporter. We don't always get all of the information. Sometimes we will know the outcomes of the patient, but most of the time we may not know the outcomes of the patient. So because this is voluntary reporting, it is very different than like reporting within your own organization where you can track that. But that said, I do wanted to mention a comment on your first comment, which is we are working with, for example, the state of California on the initiative of medication safety. And one of the things that we have advocated in California for the hospitals, there's something called the MERP, which is the Medication Error Reduction Plan. And the Department of Health mandate that every hospital, every system has to have a medication error reduction plan. And when they go for the inspection, that's what they're inspecting. They want them to be looking at the systems, continuously improving on that. And so when we're working with the California Board of Pharmacy, we advocated for that. We this is what you need is a medication error reduction plan that is robust and show that you're continuously improving your process. Show us, so literally it's like, show us what process improvement you're working on. Why are you working on that, right? Is there an error that happens? Is there a near miss that happens? And how does that work improve? Has that work improved the safety? And they will be asking for metrics. Well, I have to sit through a lot of those inspections. So it almost kind of forces you to really think hard. And because of that, there's a lot more medication safety officers in the state of California. And because this was a state inspection of the hospital, the CEO up to the CEO of the hospital knows that you need to have an action plan, and there's a lot of teeth to that. And so something similar to that for any community farm. Now, and that's the big reason why we had that big debate about best practices number 5, because we wanted folks to start that culture of talking about errors and doing process improvement. And that's where you all can come in to help kind of push that and make sure that people have, because this is not something that's natural, that's happens in the community pharmacies. It just, we have done it for so long in the hospital, it is second nature. But in the community pharmacy where resources are not that great, that's why we kind of dialed down that even to our original version is literally that you have a whole program and you're continuously looking at your errors and all those kind of things. We kind of dial back on that and just say, just start understanding what are the errors out there within your organization and out there that you can learn from. And then hopefully then we can build on that with a bigger program.
All right, Caroline Online, you're up.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I don't think you mentioned these two issues, but I was just going to put them on your radar if they weren't already. But what we are also seeing in the world of vaccine administration errors involves the fact that in a pharmacy setting, there's a dispensing record for that vaccine and a pharmacist's initials associated with the dispensing of that vaccine, but it is not necessarily that pharmacist who administered the vaccine. And so we seem to find ourselves in a position in Virginia of needing to provide perhaps some clarification or guidance on this subject, that if you are not the pharmacist, if you were the pharmacist dispensing the product, and therefore you're associated with the dispensing record, but not the one who administered the product, there needs to be a separate record out there to indicate who administered that drug, so that when there are errors, we can properly investigate and hold the right people accountable for, or at least educating, if nothing else, where this went wrong. And also in the vein of having a two-part process where someone is doing the dispensing, but someone else is doing the administration. We've also seen errors where the pharmacist assumed the nurse was going to dilute the vaccine prior to administration, but the nurse thought that when the pharmacist handed them the vial that it had already been diluted.
Yep.
So that's just another area where, because of the COVID vaccine proliferation and others administering vaccines beyond just the pharmacist on staff, could be a technician now these days. When you've got more people administering the product and involved in the process, that's a little outside our traditional dispensing model. We just need to take that into consideration and clean that up a bit to prevent these errors.
Right, agree. It's really that whole process that we're talking about, where not, I mean, yes, documentation is important, but really making sure that the standard operating procedures throughout this process of preparation and administration, so there's good handoff, is absolutely important. And that is some of the reasons why sometimes errors happen.
Jess, go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to kind of piggyback off of what Nikki was commenting on earlier. So as regulators, to have anything enforceable, we have to have laws or rules. And for a board to put a rule in place, a lot of times we have to have evidence and data to support that. So I would be interested to know if y'all have any trends or data showing trends that have been analyzed.
Well, we do. We actually, well, let me just answer this question in two parts. Do we analyze the data? Yes, absolutely, because we have a few publications just on vaccine errors that we've looked at all of our data, analyze it, and publish that. How easily is it to trend it is a totally different story, though, because again, this is voluntary reporting, right? And I would say that this is a good time for me to kind of put in my 2 cents about measuring rates of errors. We absolutely do not believe in tracking medication error rate, because the easy way to decrease error rate is by not reporting it. Because we don't have errors. What are you talking about, right? We are not, unfortunately, we're not at a time when we know that errors are rare and few and far in between, right? We are at a time where errors happens all the time. We wanted errors to be reported. And when agencies started saying that we want to see a reduction in your error rate, all you're saying is, let's just stop reporting. I mean, that's what I told, like I spent my entire career trying to explain to my C-suites why we don't want error rates to go down. We want to hear about them because that's the only way we can learn about them. So by trending, if we say trending the error rates, we never want the error rates to go down. Now, you may want to talk about preventable errors and such, but even that, you know, I mean, hopefully most of the or the harm, we would talk about, let's trend the harm that is caused to patients. But a lot of those are serious harms, maybe far and few in between. And in the community setting, you might not know. When you've made an error and nobody knows about it, you have no idea that you have just killed the patient, right? Nobody can put the 2 and 2 together unless someone has discovered that error. So we can go down a very slippery slope when we start trending error rates. And that's why we don't believe in doing that. We believe in encouraging error. As a matter of fact, in my previous life in the hospital, I actually gave people a good review if they report a lot of errors, because that's when we can learn from these errors. And that's what we needed to do now until we get to a point where we are so safe that errors are not really happening that much. Right now, we just want to uncover them.
Rita, I think you just answered one of the questions that we had here, was that, do you think that the errors are being underreported because of fear of punitive action? So I think
Absolutely.
you just
Yes.
answered that absolutely that's the case. Now I want to just talk about, we know technology works extremely well, barcoding, all the things that go along with that to reduce the errors until the humans get involved. System errors, our systems should probably be looked at to program in where there are no overrides that could be done without double checking. You know, a technician scans a barcode and she thinks she's got the right drug, so she's capable of overriding it, and it still goes on through that way. So I think the systems have to be explored as well to make sure that when you're doing your CQI or whatever, that those systems were the problem, not necessarily,
Right.
that allowed a human to make that error.
Is really the design, I think, is the design of the entire systems you're talking about, right? The technology is there to catch the error if you're using it right. And most of the time, unfortunately, when folks are implementing this technology, they really don't think about how the human is interacting with them. So at ISMP, we are talking a lot about the whole human factors engineering. Let's design a good system and process so then you can error-proof the environment. And that's the most important thing, because humans are fallible. And when you're rushed and you're skipping steps, or you think you have something in your head, just like that pharmacist who gave the wrong vaccine to another pharmacist, certainly they don't mean to give the wrong vaccine. Well, and the verification didn't work because you have a confirmation bias, right? So we need to have these entire systems built to foolproof these errors instead of just relying on someone to be alert all the time, right?
Excellent. Yeah, we are out of time, but I've got Fred over here with one follow-up question or comment.
I do, Rita. Thanks for your presentation. I think it's been a really good conversation, especially to start off this two-day meeting. Your slide that referred to the IIS, do you know, or maybe somebody else in the room can share, is reporting the vaccine administrations by pharmacists, nurses, physicians in the states a requirement to report to IIS, or is that voluntary, or is that a state-by-state issue?
It depends. Yes, it's state by state. Yes.
All right. Thank you, Fred and Ann. Thank you all for your comments and your questions and interaction here. And Rita, let's thank her once again for her presentation.
Thank you so much.
And for her giving us her time to come in to talk to us about this. And I will now turn it over to the lovely and effervescent Nikki Chopsky to take over and moderate our next session.
Good afternoon. I'm Nikki Chopsky, a member of the NABP Executive Committee and the Executive Officer of the Idaho State Board of Pharmacy. First, I'd like to thank Rita again for her insightful presentation. And our next session today is Introduction to the Just Culture Approach. During this session, we will discuss a method and attitude toward medication errors that looks at the systems in which medication errors occur in order to prevent future errors. Speaking today is Barbara Olson, Senior Advisor at the Just Culture Company. Now Barbara will share her insights.
Yes, so good afternoon and thank you for having me. I'm really delighted to be here, and I'm particularly delighted to follow Rita, because I don't know if you can see all the little alphabet things there. I spent a year with the Institute for Safe Medication Practices in 2007. I was a registered nurse of some experience, dedicated, educated, positively motivated, and looking and recruiting others who had a similar good set of values and intention, when I really just hit the wall and said, there is something about the way care is organized and delivered that is simply not working for me or for the people that I am charged with helping. Most of them were pregnant and birthing women. So I wound up, surprisingly, at the Institute for Safe Medication Practices, where I was first exposed to the notion that one had to consider the systems that people worked in, as well as their intention when trying to determine if an outcome is actually expected, predictable, or might be one of those never event things that you all just talked about. So I'm always happy to connect, to what I consider to be my roots in the discipline of patient safety, which is through medication safety. So much to be learned. I was not an expert in pharmacy, really didn't know that much about the medication use system or how that was organized before I got to ISMP. I will tell you though, and I think you'll hear it as we talk through examples and so forth, that influence is profound. If you can't get this in med safety, this is Barbara's opinion, I will tell you, no one will be able to get it, because medication safety is blessed with actually a flow and a process that you can understand, trace, and map a whole lot better than many of the things that dog us in healthcare. I'll tell you one other quick thing, because you mentioned you wish that you knew the Just Culture Company was out there when you got started. So David Marks is the founder of the Just Culture Company. I met him for the first time when I was with ISMP. David is a systems engineer. He comes out of aviation. He's also an attorney. And his company was originally called Outcome Engineering, Outcome Ingenuity. So if that rings a bell with any of you, that is David. So the model I'm going to advance with you here today really has some roots. David first published in 2000 about the utility of this model for managing errors, diminishing risks, and holding people accountable in healthcare. Whoops, okay. So really, when people say just culture, I'm kind of a plain spoken woman. So I'm just going to tell you, if I say Windex, Tampax, Kleenex, most of you can say, I kind of get my head around what that is. I can pick that out of a lineup. When I say just culture, you should probably pause and scratch your head, because anybody can label anything as just. So the key is to really appreciate what are the attributes of a system that will advance what is important to you. So one of the first ahas here is that just culture is really not what you do to someone or not do to someone in the aftermath of a bad event. It is a values-centric system of workplace justice. This is really about what you recognize, reward, tolerate, and punish every day. And that includes the behavioral choices and the human errors of the people who are standing up doing this work, as well as the systems that collectively we decide are adequate to produce the task at hand. So I flew in here yesterday. Most of you probably did too, not those of you that with her in a BP, but for those of you that really recently got off of an airline. they can tell you how safe you are. It may be sufficient for you to know very safe, like in the millions safe, right? Your luggage, not as safe as you. You know it, and they know it. And it's measured. It is possible to map a trajectory and say, what is the likelihood that something is going to fail here, given that we rely on a human being to do this, and we rely on technology to catch that? And oh, how often are those things worked around? Or how often might somebody make a mistake? And then mathematically, what is the failure rate? Because everything will fail. Or my husband, who is an anesthetist, says, all bleeding will stop. You know, there is no such thing as a never event. You know, you pull out your spitballs at me if you want, because that's a scary thing to say. You can hope something will never fail. You can say it will only fail 1 in a million times. And if you can say that, throw a party, man, and invite me, because that's what we're aspiring to. But the real question here is, how often will it fail? And is that failure rate within what you can tolerate? So let me just ask you, we're going to talk mostly as I frame this, but I'm willing to go off script. You can probably tell that. But I frame this mostly to talk about people and behavioral choices with some within the system. We'll get into that a little bit tomorrow when you do some case analysis, but this is really more about judging people for the quality of their choices in the workplace. All right, so real quick, 5 things here. And if you are in the listening audience, please use the chat to pop in the letter that best describes you. All righty, so if you're here in the room, it's time to do some clap busting because you guys have been sitting for a while. If this whole idea of a just culture is brand new to you, first time you're hearing it, Barbara, is going to be your first walk down the road. Stand up. Okay, all of you have heard it. Okay, do you have a basic understanding of the model? If that, you're a B. Have you practiced? I'm surprised. I thought some of you might have like a basic understanding, but might not have actually been in an organization that adopted it. All right, anybody that has practiced in an organization that adopted just culture? I said, thank you. All right. Okay. All right. So all righty. Okay. Yeah. And I know as a board and a board member in your role, I may be asking you to do things that are a little bit uncomfortable, because sometimes you have to say, I know it because it's what I came up with when I was more clinical. All right. How many of you feel really competent applying just culture to respond to the conduct of individuals and to improve the reliability of processes? Yeah, just you're down. You're going to sit down, and anybody want to teach it? All right. So there might be something out there that I didn't get, that I didn't hit. Is anything I should have asked that's not up there? A's and B's. Okay. All right. Okay. Cool. Very good.
Hi, this is Mitch Sobel from New Jersey. So I actually teach this as part of my pharmacy leadership and management course at Fairleigh Dickinson University, School of Pharmacy. What is very disappointing to me in my experience is that there's a big difference between your senior leadership of healthcare institutions and pharmacies embrace just culture and actually practice it. Yeah. So I see a huge disparity between folks that say, hey, we have a just culture, but then when an error occurs, boy, do you see the finger pointing and the blame, and they go actually counterproductive as to what the just culture really means. And that happens more often than not. Sorry to be a Donnie Downer here, but
no, not hearing that at all. I welcome the comment, and I'm going to invite you as we go through here. I've tried to make this somewhat interactive, and tomorrow we're going to be doing some analyses and so forth. But I am here for you, and you should feel free to challenge ideas. All right. I didn't tell you that in between ISMP and where I am now, I went to work for 2 large healthcare systems based out of Nashville, Tennessee. And so I have a keen sense of operations, and I'm willing to really talk about the hard things. All right, so just culture, what it is then is a system of workplace justice, and know that it is not a discipline unto itself. It does, however, draw from 4 recognized disciplines. Across that horizontal line, you have human factors. For those of you that have been in healthcare for a long time and may have the sense that human factors are the things you label when a person messes up a system that is otherwise designed to work or you wish would work, that's not what it is at all. It's really about how do people use their best cognitive capacity in a reliable fashion and do what the brain does without being shut down, bored, distracted, all those things. That's human factors. System engineering is how it's designed. Behavioral economics is what motivates people. So when I heard Rita talk a lot about busy, if I was just like, thinking about it, it's like, oh, the number one problem in pharmacy or community pharmacy or people getting a vaccine is like everybody's busy. Nobody has any time to pay attention. That could be one of the really big ones, right? But what motivates people to make the choices that they do is very important to those of you who are going to own the systems by which we judge people. If we say productivity is the most important thing, then you will need to accept a human error rate that is commensurate with your productivity. There's no magic here. I'm telling you stuff you know. But when you actually say, how do we fold that into a model of professional justice, that's where we really want to unpack it some more. So really short story here. Just culture is not a blame-free system of workplace or professional justice. Rather, it holds people accountable for the quality of their choices relative and within the systems that they use to do their work. I pulled your values because it's always helpful just to say, okay, what motivates you? And every board I've ever worked with, nursing, pharmacy, it is about protecting public health. So a little bit of what you all have to do is determine what model of improvement makes sense. What can you live with as scientists and thinkers? Because when you go to protect the public health, what drives continuous improvement? If I tell you, you can't have never events, you can have them, you can label anything ever you want, but you can't, this side of the kingdom, make that happen because you want it. What you can do, though, is say we value a system of justice that will allow us to learn, that will allow us to measure and continuously improve. Now, I threw up on the bottom, and usually when people say protect the public health, you're thinking about safety, right? Your obligation, usually boards do it through licensure, and they do it through the evaluation of conduct as things come to you. So most of the things that are conduct related that go to boards are going to involve serious, egregious acts or things that resulted in harm. And those are 2 totally different things. Sometimes harm comes from acts that are not egregious. And that's what I'm going to walk you through. Because what you need is a way to be able to peel those apart and to be able to say, I know what bucket we're in. I know how we got here. I could replicate this if I need to next week. And I'm confident it is going to serve my mission of protecting the public. So I gave you the IOM domains equality because most of the organizations that are going to take some action against an employee, against a provider, practitioner, you will be doing so because something important to them was violated, right? There was an error that resulted in a patient harm, or there was some act that could have caused significant harm or damage. So, at the end of the day, everybody has something they value, and it's important in just culture to know what that is. So here's the model. 5 behaviors. Many times people are familiar with 3 of the 5. The 5 have always been there, and they represent the spectrum of human intention. This is a little bit squirrely, and we have human factors and behavioral economists on our team. And so while it makes me squirm a little bit, I'm just going to say it's good enough to start to frame things. If you are a deep subject matter expert in any of those areas, I'm promising you, I'm going to say at least a thing or two that may make you uncomfortable. But the first behavior that we're going to look at is human error. This is unintended conduct, things that people do that they did not intend to do. Rita was full of that. I mean, I was just like, I wanted to stand up at the back and say, show more. All right, I will give you two things. One has an oral suspension in it, and one has an injectable in it. They look alike. They feel alike in your hand. And we're going to be shocked and dismayed, as we rightly are, when some human takes one of those things and uses it in the wrong way. And for those of you that are going to get on a plane to go home tomorrow, just walk over and bang your heads against the wall, because in no way, shape, or form would aviation allow in this era stuff like that to come into the hands of one person and say, do your best. You know better. So if you want to know why aviation has better outcomes in terms of passenger safety than we will ever have in healthcare until we change how we do things and what we allow to be in the hands, forget it. The numbers, though, are 1 in 1,000. 1 in 1,000 times a reasonably competent person is going to do what they don't intend to do or forget to do something that they did intend to do. And in a just culture, when you find that, you accept that humans err. It is the signal, if that error reached a patient and caused harm, that the system is not designed sufficiently to protect against human error, unless you're happy with 1 in 1,000. I mean, and that's the beauty. I talk out of this side of my mouth sometimes, but I'm serious. If you forget to pick up milk at the store, do you redesign your whole system? Or do you just say, I don't care, I'll go back and pick it up tomorrow? Some things don't matter. But if you care about methotrexate reaching a patient labeled for daily use, or the wrong patient, whatever, horrific combination of things you all would know, you have to accept 1 in 1,000 times that's going to happen, unless you build a system that puts in a double check and is more reliable. So when we say we accept human error, we don't accept what happens to our patients, but we have to accept a certain rate of human error in order to build the better system. Now, at the opposite end of the continuum is purpose to cause harm. This is where an individual intends to harm someone. Purpose means purpose, right? It is the complete opposite of human error. And when we have purpose to harm, and this is true both in workplace justice under just culture and true in criminal and civil justice, it is a behavior that deserves disciplinary sanction. So when I say just culture is not blame-free, it's not. It's not at all. The recent case, I think it was in Ohio, with a physician that was prescribing for patients at the end of life doses of medications that he knew to be would cause death, sort of making the decision like, we're just going to get you out of here sooner. Now, the courts in Ohio did not find that to be as egregious as the courts in Tennessee found a string of nursing errors to be. But you can see this is alive and well in the sphere in which you all operate. Moving along the continuum of egregious behavior, the next one is knowledge. These are acts that are undertaken with certainty that they will, near certainty, almost 100% certainty that they will cause harm. These two result in disciplinary sanction. In terms of patient safety, it is rare to see clinicians act out on their patients in ways that involve knowledge or purpose. The one thing that tends to show up in healthcare settings is people will steal from their patient. So if I steal your wallet, there's 100% certainty that you don't have something of value, your wallet, and I have something of value, your stuff. So when you say, like, give me an example of knowledge, it's theft. All right. So for you all, that's going to move into the space of I'm stealing drugs and selling them on the street in order to advance my personal goals. So you will see knowledge in the things that are evaluated under the auspices of pharmacy and organizations that employ pharmacists. Reckless conduct is conscious disregard of a substantial and unjustifiable risk. So it's not volition. It's appreciating there is risk here of something of value, and I'm willing to move forward with it anyway. It's a gamble. I've got you some pharmacy examples coming, so we'll just kind of pause, let that perk. If you had a guardian angel on your shoulder telling you in the moment, and not a good idea, don't do that, and it's chirping, and you say, I'm doing it anyway, that's conscious disregard. You can see the risk. You appreciate that there's a gamble. There's not certainty. A lot of times people engage in reckless behavior because there's not certainty that something bad is going to happen. That's what makes them willing to take the risk. There was a dentist last year. Nobody here's from Alaska. Nobody on the phone, right? So there was a dentist last year in Alaska that hit the news. It's one of those where there's smoke, there's fire. But the thing that got him some initial attention was he was practicing dentistry while standing on a hoverboard, extracting a tooth. They blurred out the patient's face so you couldn't see. It wasn't a HIPAA violation, which was kind of interesting, but it was practicing dentistry while standing on a hoverboard because he was just so stinking sure that he was a skilled dentist and a skilled person on the hoverboard that he was willing to take the risk of standing on an unstable surface while extracting the tooth of a sedated patient, right? So if you got to like, tell me what reckless might look like, I think that's a really good one because there was actually a choice to stand on the floor where most other dentists are going to stand, right? Or I can say, it'll probably go okay. I sure am going to have a lot of fun, right? But this is adding risk beyond what the patient would or should be subjected to in a normal circumstance, okay? And then finally, at-risk behavior. At-risk behavior is also volitional. It is a choice where the risk is not recognized or is mistakenly believed to be justified. So if you are picturing the angel on your shoulder, the angel is silent. And part of the reason that our angels become silent is we get used to things. What will make we call the angel the risk monitor. What will make your appreciation of risk or your risk monitor go to sleep is when you see it all the time and you do it all the time and you recognize, yeah, I can take my annual competencies and I can check the right box. I know the right answer. However, I don't do that. It's not possible to do it sometimes, or it's just not what we do. So with at-risk behavior, you see volitional choice, but where people have lost the sense that something with this conduct is bad or wrong. It's not that they don't know. Anybody here, just out of curiosity, ever go 8 miles over the speed limit? Just asking. Ever set your thing? Thank you. You know what a thing is. Ever set, I mean, not like you look down and say, oh my foot inadvertently goes on the gas a little bit too much. Like you crank it up right to the number that you are pretty sure will keep you under the posted limit. Yeah, you're all there. Because if you're not, I'm just either you don't drive or you have a loose association with the truth. Because that's what people do. Now, I'm not here to tell you or sell you on at-risk behavior to tell you it's the new standard of care or this is what we should accept in our world. What we must do, though, as leaders is recognize this is part of the human condition. And if you want to manage the risks that arise from at-risk behavior, you have to treat it differently. All right, now I'm going to give you the rest of the model, and then we'll have some time to really push around here a little bit. Key to a just culture. All right, I've given you the 5 behaviors. There's nothing that you're going to throw. If you do, I mean, I'll be surprised, but there's nothing that you are going to throw out and say, so-and-so did this, or so-and-so forgot that, or blah, 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 that cannot be bucketed into one of those 5 things. They can be complex. They can be layered. You may oftentimes have to say, what was the behavior right before the human error? Henry ran the forklift into the wall. Oh, bummer. Poor Henry. He didn't mean to do that. Certainly not his intention, right? What was he doing right before he ran into the wall? Oh, he was on a cell phone. Okay, well, now we have a behavior that we can actually act on. So when you become and you support teams who are expert in just culture, they are able to get in there and tease out what is the specific conduct that we're looking at. Absent a system of justice that does that, you will likely default to what the American jurisprudence system will have you do, which is to look at outcome. We judge people more harshly for any of these behaviors when it results in an outcome that we don't like. And so one of the defining principles of just culture is you judge for the quality of the choice, not the luck of the outcome. And what we find is most of your area of opportunity here to be just is to separate at risk from reckless conduct by divorcing it from outcome. In other words, doesn't mean it's get out of jail free. You don't coach somebody because nobody got hurt. You coach someone because they didn't see that their choices, their conduct conferred a substantial and unjustifiable risk, that they didn't see it in the moment. So when you think about somebody who deserves to be punished, what you must ask is, would I be willing to punish that individual for the same conduct if harm hadn't occurred? The easy thing is to say, don't judge based on outcome. The harder thing is to tell you what to do, what to judge people for. So judge for the quality of the choice. And the system and the process allows that. This is a teachable, learnable system of justice. And I'm going to share a little bit more about what makes it that way. All right, I'm going to give you a couple of pharmacy examples, then we'll take some questions before we go on and do a little bit of contrast between workplace justice and jurisprudence. So, and this is great because, Rita's examples gave many of these. So human error, selecting the wrong drug, dose, frequency, blah, 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 from a computerized pick list. Anything where, and I heard so much of that likely going on, where I heard human errors that were making those of you go like this or is because there weren't adequate either by system design double checks or some means of detecting and correcting before the error had the opportunity to reach the target. Sometimes it is failure to manage those expectations. I will tell you, as a nurse of long standing, never when I was taught to read the label did anybody say, the reason you read the label is there's some chance that when you took it and got it into your hand, you will have the wrong thing. The act of looking at a label is generally, think about how things are organized, especially today, right? The drawer pops open, They reach into the thing that says it's in bin, out it comes. So the first time somebody's looking at it isn't necessarily when they select it. It's when they're saying, is that what I'm supposed to have in my hand? Cognitively, that is a completely different act than just pulling it out. So when we look and say, you know, how well are systems organized? Are there reasonable things in place to prevent the error from being set in motion? Maybe if we're talking about a paralytic, is it sequestered? Is it in its own box? Does it require a second person to enter initials and validate that that's there? I'm not saying every drug. I'm not saying any drugs. I'm just saying if you don't want it in somebody's hand, if you want to prevent the human error, those are the upstream things that need to occur. And we need to have monitoring of those processes. I love to talk to pharmacists because you all own so much of the technology and the reports that actually tell you what's going on. How are people using those reports of wrong drug detected at the point of care? Because what that's telling you is something got through. It's a good signal that you don't have read the label behavior. So it gives you an opportunity to act on it before you have a tragedy. Saying they went to nursing school and they know they have to read the label is, from a system standpoint, an insufficient way of managing the risk. So it's what people will predictably do. Will they drift? Will they do some things like, can I talk on the phone while I'm pulling my meds? This is whether I'm at an automated dispensing cabinet, or if I don't see this in my community pharmacy all day, every day, I don't know where I am, because people are always multitasking. Now, I'm not telling you the person is right or wrong. I am saying it is at-risk behavior. It increases the likelihood of a wrong drug getting into their hands. Can the system stand it? Sure, depends how strongly you're using barcoding at the other side. You decide, right? You know, you sort of say, how much risk can we do? If that's not an acceptable behavior, though, in an organization, what we need to see is coaching. You may not realize that's a risk, but it is. And I'm going to ask you to stop it. From a leadership standpoint, what it also means, though, is you have to be willing to say, what do I want you to do instead? And oftentimes what people need to hear is productivity doesn't trump safety. Safety is only the most important value if it is organizationally valued. In ORs, is a complete timeout more important than an on-time start if the surgeon is running late? I do not know. I know the safety answer. I do not know what is recognized and rewarded in that organization. So when you're really trying to manage at-risk behavior, you have to decide, what do I want them to do differently? Why couldn't the person see that risk? And what is in our control to manage? Recklessness, and this is where I gave you a couple of things to think about in terms of diversion. If a person chooses to become impaired on the job or shows up impaired on the job, then what they're doing essentially, it's a conscious decision. And I'm well aware that this is a behavioral health issue, and I'm fully supportive of all things that say there is a path back. You can be healed. There is a path back. But the reason we say this demands disciplinary sanction is when you're called out on it, you're removed from your role, and you have a choice about what you're going to do with the rest of your life. Most people are going to experience that as disciplinary action. And in point of fact, it is. They're removed from the environment until they can cease to present that risk. So reckless conduct there is saying, I'll just gamble that I'm as good stoned as I am sober. It's a risk you can't accept. Right. So it's important, though, to peel apart, is the person impaired themselves, or are they taking the medication and selling it on the street in order to be able to, take their family on vacation or whatever? That's knowledge. There's 100% certainty when I steal from my employer that you all don't have something that I now do. Right. And then I gave you the example of purpose. Again, in the types of things that you likely see and maybe are revisiting is how you handle and respond to human error, at-risk behavior, and recklessness. Generally, people are already pretty clear about what they do with knowledge, the stealers, the places where the criminal and civil law set us up to have really good alignment. So let me pause here just for a minute and see what questions, anything in the chat, anything anybody wants to bring up? Yes.
Barbara, under human error, you mentioned it, that the numbers are like 1 in 1,000 ish.
That's what
As we go
engineer
across
used.
the chart, by the time we get to purpose, are we at like 1 to 1?
Nah. Oh,
do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like,
yeah.
I mean, we're probably not willing to accept one. I mean, maybe we are for milk, for getting milk, we're willing to accept 1 in 1,000 times, but for medications, probably not great. But as we move across the chart towards you, I think when you get to purpose, that's like a 1 to 1, right?
Are you talking about like I have zero tolerance for purpose to cause harm?
Purpose is always going to,
well, they can, oh no, I mean, honestly, if somebody can come in here saying, I'm going to go shoot my wife and she's down there, I used to live with her and she's now working in that unit, I'm after her, whether he gets her or not is purpose, right?
50,
I mean, the law, right. Well, the law, right, depends. Yeah. What the law says, and we're going to look at this in a minute, because I hope by adding that value in there, I'm not suggesting how okay it is. I don't know how often you all, if you analyze the things that you evaluate, you would know what percentage of complaints that come to a board involve purpose. You would know what percentage are in each of those buckets.
But I would say that, I guess my question is if I was talking to a person or an organization and we were to say, this was reckless behavior and you're likely to end up with a disciplinary sanction.
Yeah.
It's even a higher chance than 1 in 1,000.
Oh yeah. Oh.
And like purpose is like,
no, it's a great question. Thank you. I wasn't following you, Nikki. So the organizational response is tightly coupled to the quality of the choice. What can be different is, let's say you have somebody and they have intent to defraud a payer, generally a 0. You do that once and it was intentional, you're gone and we're reporting you, right? You might have a cook who drops a ladle, just saying, I've heard this, on the floor and decides they're not going to clean it off before they stick it back in the soup of the day. That's reckless. That is reckless to the health. It's reckless to the reputation, but you're not going to jail because you did that, right? So the specific penalty that is applied will be different depending on how egregious it is. But when you actually say, how do we know if we're going to punish this person? It needs to have met the threshold of reckless knowledge or purpose. And I'm going to I hope say something welcoming. People who engage in repetitive at-risk behavior. You have done your level best to wake up their appreciation of risk. We see this a lot in hand hygiene, okay? And they simply say, I see your point. I disagree. I'm going to do it my way. All right. It's a will issue, not a skill issue. And usually when you're trying to close on an important metric, things that may have once been seen as at risk, all of a sudden the herd has moved, the curve has shifted, and you got people that are like, do whatever you want, but I'm doing my thing. Patterns of repetitive at-risk behavior you can punish. I mean, you can do anything you want here, but in general, what you're trying to do is have this consistent response. And let me push anything else that's burning, because I was going to say, if I show you a little bit more around the civil and criminal, sometimes that.
Hi, it's Anastasia again.
Yeah.
Thanks, Barbara, for the dogma is really interesting. Where I'm, I guess, still trying to wrap my head around is this would work well in an organization. When you translate it to the regulator, and you're also dealing with public expectations, and
Yeah.
And internationally, professional regulation is coming under scrutiny. So for example, a pharmacist dispenses 10 times the dose of methadone, which is a human error, but there was a patient adverse outcome. That patient, I guess in our jurisdiction, they have the right to lodge a complaint. How would it look to them, or how would you explain to them that, well, there's not going to be any sanctions? So I guess that's where I'm, a little bit confused about translating that.
No,
over.
it's a great point. And as we look at how, and I'm not an expert in anybody's model. I'm going to share with you ours, and I would suspect most Western models of jurisprudence are similarly built. It really takes a shared mental model around why you don't punish for at-risk behavior. Rita made a great point about what you're trying to do is surface. Right. For organizations that are really on a high reliability journey and they're teaching, we're going to have a shift debrief. We're going to say, what went wrong today? What almost happened? What did you have to work around? All of those questions are revealing those things that almost happened or in point of fact did. And it is incumbent on people to be able to feel like they can say their truth without fear that they will be punished, right? So if you want to get rid of this no harm, no foul, you have to be really clear about it. The other issue, Anastasia, is if something is so weakly engineered, and I don't say this to hurt anybody's feelings, I too am a clinician and I am an American and I am subject to all of the same stinking risks that you and your family members are when you seek care. But honestly, if one person's human error can result in that level of harm, you have to go back to say, what do we want to do to improve that? Now, I want to cheer you up. Some of this is about using barcoding and managing those metrics. If it is normal to scan a product after it has gone into a patient, you got a human performance problem that's hugely solvable. Right? It's what organizations choose to put their attention on. And generally, the public likes this as long as there's not an expectation that everybody is perfect. Okay. So let's look real quick, and then we're going to defer. And let me just give you these. Okay. Humans are fallible. Anybody surprised? This is to help you manage human fallibility, right? All right. People will make suboptimal choices when they are between a rock and a hard place. I'm a nurse. I'm supposed to stay within toilet, distant, walk hand distance while somebody's on the toilet, and my other patient chokes. When I go to take care of the patient who's choking, I do create risk over here for this other patient. If they fall, I hope you don't punish me. I hope you reward me for helping the choking patient. So know that all of the choices we make should not demand a disciplinary response, even if something bad happens. I have no control once I go to help the choker, whether the totterer on the potty is going to come off or not. That's not, I've said that better in the past, but you know what I mean. All right. So the design of systems influences how often humans will err. It also drives your rate of at-risk behavior. Okay, it really won't change recklessness, but if you got to work around to get your work done, they'll work around. All right. Systems become safer when the reasons for the procedural violations and suboptimal choices are understood and acted on. And I'm going to just tell you, thank you for having me. I'm not quite done, but it takes a lot to hear this when you must judge through a regulatory, highly procedural lens and answer to the public, right? So again, we ask why did they do that, right? What was behind the human error? What part of the system could we fix? And then justice relies on the findings of a sound event investigation. Tomorrow, you're going to have the opportunity to go through and look at some things after you hear from others who have already implemented just culture. But know that you can't do this work fairly without having the results of a 5-question threshold investigation that helps you appreciate what risks the individual saw and how an organization manages the risk. when you judge individuals for the quality of their choice, just know that you're not judging them for the luck of the outcome. All right. That may or may not happen. All right. Quick look here at how criminal and civil law take on these behaviors. These come from the 5 behaviors that David identified, come straight out of American jurisprudence. The difference, though, is negligence. All right. Reckless knowledge and purpose, it is a 1-to-1 match. This is why I tell you, chances are, if somebody has done something like brought a gun into the pharmacy with the intent of killing a coworker, you're very aligned with what everybody in your community and everybody in the state is going to expect you to do. It's just right there. Where it gets different, though, is negligence includes in the law both things that you do unintentionally and those things that we would call at-risk behavior, where you should have known, but perhaps it wasn't possible. And it is in splitting those out, human error from at-risk, that you get the opportunity to grow your safety culture, where it becomes normal. And I love, Rita, when you said you used to reward people for reporting errors, right? Because it's not like you're reporting them or you're rewarding them for screwing up. Like, the more you foul up here, the more I'm going to love it. It's really saying part of the human condition is to be out there and to be tempted to do these things, to be drawn in, to maybe have to do them. These are the people who are willing to put their hand up and say, hey, let me tell you, it's not that perfect. Let me tell you what really scared me. And oftentimes people can't put their finger on what risk is. Like, what was the last thing? What was your last close call? I don't know. They don't even see it as a close call. They see it as what I had to do to get through the shift. So when you can really get at this and start to ask the open-ended questions and mine and harvest, you get what you need to fix your system, to improve the true reliability and to drive towards zero harm. So with that, Nikki, I'm going to look to you for a little bit of guidance, because we're at a place where I do have one case we could do, or we can kind of punt and let that go and perhaps look at it tomorrow right before you do the other session. I will.
Well, I'm not the boss,
Well,
but
you
I will
can-
tell you, around here at NABP, we run on time.
I'm sorry,
And
run
you
on-
are out of time.
Yeah, I was going to say,
So-
I am a start on time, end on time kind of gal.
Oh, but you started late. So
Oh.
I just got permission for you to be a little bit over
Okay,
on
yeah,
time.
all right.
We can
Uh,
probably go to like
And
Yeah.
we do have a couple questions already in the queue, and frankly, they overfeed us here at these things. So I would imagine that no one's actually starving in the room. Maybe there's a restroom bio break, but we could probably go a few more minutes and you could go on. And then I know we have 2 questions in the queue.
Okay.
Oh, maybe not.
No, I'm not taking over. I just had a quick comment coming back to what Anastasia was talking about. Sure, there's time for my comments. Anyway, coming back to what you said, I think that is what boards struggle with the most. When the patients, I think, understand that pharmacists are human and they see what's going on back there behind the counter, and they understand how errors can be made, and they are willing to accept that until it happens to them.
Mhm.
And then they want that pharmacist license. They want them out of the profession, and they could have died from whatever mistake was happening like that. And that goes to the board, with that type of
Mhm.
vitriol or hatred or whatever it might be, especially if you're a director of a board. That's what you see when you see the complaints when they come through. And I think that's where the board struggle with this whole concept is all right, I've got a patient out here that I'm supposed to be protecting. They did not get protected and they want a pound of flesh. How do I deal with that? And if you come back and you just say, well, it was a human error, don't discipline enough, say they don't understand why that person was not disciplined or again, run out of the profession. So that's the difficult thing, I think, that as a board member you have to deal with. And I always felt like in Tennessee, we were a lot more understanding of human error, even though we weren't running under this just culture deal. I thought we were very understanding about people making human errors, but we always did get blowback from the patients and from the general public when we did not do something for those individuals.
So let me offer this. 2 things come to mind. First of all, there's strength in numbers, right? There is something to say, this is how we collectively, as professionals, choose to judge, stand in judgment of people who work in systems that, I mean, I'm going to be really candid here based on, Rita, what you just shared, and I'm not trying to, I might put a pharmaceutical manufacturer under the bus on occasion. I'm just saying it's shockingly prone to human error. So when you say, as an organization, this is our model, I think you have more strength to the international point than when you say this is just what Arkansas is going to do, or this is just what Tennessee is going to do, because it appeals to us. When you say it is a science-based approach to managing the human condition in complex systems, you have something to stand on. And I always appreciate that as a citizen. The other thing I would say is there's a recent report in the New England Journal of Medicine, and you all have probably seen it or heard of it. It is very disappointing. It's particularly disappointing to people like me who have been around long enough and remember the IOM report and actually thought something was going to improve. Just culture first came into focus almost 25 years ago because people recognized that shame, blame, and retrain were part of the fundamental flaws in how we approached human performance in complex systems. And we said, if we want it to look different, we must do something differently in order to get the better outcomes. I don't think we have. I'm honored to be here. I'm all over the place. I like to think I'm all over the place. I'm not in a few places. And people are still fundamentally struggling with this. The New England Journal of Medicine report shows that 25% of people who are in acute care facilities will have an adverse event occur to them, whether it's medicine or something else. We're not there. And if you're in a big facility, it's 40%. Because of the complexities. So at some point, I think there's an opportunity to say, hang on, we really aren't doing this because my way is better than your way, but this is the path that will get us where we need to go. So things to reflect on.
I got to get to Eileen. She's got somebody on hold.
Yeah.
She's had him on hold for 30 minutes. Sorry.
Yeah, well, we have a question from Carrie Phillips from Vermont. She would like you to expand on the sometimes justified and the knowingly.
Thank you. It's a great question. Yeah, because knowingly causing harm, sometimes you are so between a rock and a hard place. Like when a fireman has to break down your door and pull you out, they're going to damage your property, right? There is a loss there. They might even hurt you, throwing you over the shoulder. But when the choice to cause harm is the lesser of two evils, then you support the individual who made that. The model is all about, appreciating complexity. In healthcare, it's that for you guys, it's chemo. Somebody prescribes, somebody dispenses, somebody administers chemotherapy, that is poison, but you are saying this is your best choice relative to the other choices we have. That's a great question.
We can do, we're right on the minute. We can do one more, but just real quick before you ask your question, did you also have a story you wanted to tell?
I do, but I'm
You can
okay.
hold it till tomorrow.
Yeah, we can either hold it to, I don't feel like it's mission critical. I thought if we had extra time, we would.
We got
run
no
it. I
extra
could
time.
show
This is
you,
super interesting. Everyone's engaged. Yeah.
So great overview, great description, lots of great examples. But what you described was generally individual choices and individual behaviors and how it fits into this. How do you overlay the organization, the owner, the company, the supervisor, the people who make a choice to not have barcoding or make a choice to understaff that situation? So you might have the best.
Are you going to dinner? Because we want to buy you an extra drink for that question.
Hold on. We need you to answer that though, because there's people online that have the exact same question and they won't be at dinner to hear the conversation.
No.
John Kirtley, this
just
one's
saying
for
that,
you.
Okay. So the, oh gosh. All right. So I got so distracted there. It might've gone out of my head. How do we manage?
So how do you factor in beyond the individual behavior?
Yeah. Okay. So it is rare that you will do an analysis, particularly if you have a really tragic event and you really have to go back. it is absolutely part of just culture to say, let's go upstream. Once you have a good root cause analysis, like one of the questions I think that would be very fair, I think probably everybody is very familiar with, you may not know the case deeply, but everybody knows something happened to a nurse in Tennessee in recent years, right? So I think it would be very fair to look and say, what were the processes and where did accountability lie for the configuration of the automated dispensing cabinet? Where are the decisions around why there isn't barcoding in radiology? Now, I mean, let me say this, I'm not a deep subject matter expert in Leapfrog, but I will tell you a lot of people are very motivated to do things because that's what Leapfrog requires them to do. Well, you know, that probably doesn't include radiology in 2017. So you might come to some conclusion that there really was no breach on the part of an organization that did not put barcoding in there. I know when I go to the doctor's office, they sure don't use it, and nobody seems to think that's a problem, except depending on what they're giving me, I might care because I think 1 in 1,000 is too much, right? Does that answer it? You know, yes, you can apply it to people in senior leadership roles and to people in mid-level roles that are making decisions.
Thank you all for your comments. We are out of time for this session. So let's again thank our speaker, Barbara. And we will now take a refreshment break. Refreshments are available in the cafe. Please be back in this room by, it says 3:30. We could go 3:32, 3:33 for the next session. 5 to 7 minutes, please. Let's get back on track. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. All right, well, welcome back. I hope you had a minute to grab a good snack because we always eat well here. I am Tracy Collier. I'm a member of the NABP Executive Committee and the administrator of the South Carolina Board of Pharmacy. The next session we have this afternoon is the NCSBN approach to medication error discipline. During the session, we're going to discuss the role of the boards, specifically the nursing boards, in response to medication errors by using a just culture approach and evaluating medication error cases. Speaking today, we have Marian Alexander, who's the Chief Officer of Nursing Regulation for the National Council of State Boards of Nursing. So
that we designed to help boards, they actually came to us and said, you know, we want a method where we can be more consistent in our disciplinary process and also incorporate the principles of just culture. So we developed this model for them. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about it and walk you through. So simply, the goals of this is, you know, it protects the public, it incorporates just culture principles, and it increases consistency and discipline. And it was designed for nursing regulatory bodies, but really it can be applicable to other health professions as well. And it's meant for cases of practice error or unprofessional conduct. And it focuses on patient safety and whether system failure and or the behavioral choices of the nurse contributed to the error. So just a review, I know you had a presentation on this, but this is what we kept in mind when we developed this tool. So the duties of a healthcare provider: to produce an outcome, to follow a procedural role, and to avoid unjustifiable risk. And there is what we all know, a healthcare quagmire, especially for regulators. We want people to report errors, and we need that. We need the data for patient safety. So we don't want people to be overly restricted from reporting errors because they're afraid they're going to get in trouble. But by the same token, a blame-free culture is not practical, and some errors warrant disciplinary action. So this was basically a way of finding a balance between the extremes of punishment and blamelessness. So it looks at the system, as well as the behavioral choices, in this case of the nurse. And it looks at 3 types of error: human error, at-risk behavior, and reckless behavior. So let me get into the pathway. We felt this was a method that could kind of walk a board of nursing through the process with these types of errors. So the first thing on the back, you will notice that there are definitions. And the reason for that is, although they're pretty standard words, nothing unusual, we wanted everyone to be on the same page in terms of the terms that we use on this pathway. So we define them on the back. So I'm going to walk you through it a little bit. So the first thing is actually looks at bad intent. So the question is, were the actions of the nurse intended to deliberately harm the patient? And of course, these are really bad actors. They're few and far between, but nevertheless, we want to sort that out, whether it was deliberate, and that's automatically bad intent. You don't need to go through this pathway any further. This says assess mitigating and aggravating factors. I'm actually going to redo this and take that out because I don't know what kind of mitigating factors there could possibly be for anybody that deliberately intended to harm a patient. So, but it used to say, report these individuals to law enforcement. And that, of course, is at the board discretion. But actions could include a summary suspension, some type of suspension with conditions, permanent suspension, revocation, or surrender or voluntary surrender of the license. But basically, this is a bad actor that you don't want in practice, probably ever again. So starting then again at the top, one of the things that this looks at is, were there system issues involved? And so, you know, we encourage, if, you know, a lot of times the institution already knows that there's a system issue that was involved here. But if you uncover that in the investigation, we recommend to the boards that they give that information back to the institution that the nurse or the respondent came from. And so that would be a yes, communicate to the facility or the employer regarding the significant system circumstances that contributed to the error. And whether it is a yes or a no in this portion of the algorithm, we're looking at whether the nurse concealed the error or falsified the records. And if that's a yes, we automatically classify that as reckless behavior. And so you would, again, when you got to that, look at mitigating and aggravating factors to determine the type of discipline that you're going to actually give. But again, this is pretty significant types of discipline that we look at. So everything from a summary suspension, revocation, surrender, things like that. But now let's go back and look. Let's say that a nurse did not conceal the error or falsify the records. So the next question is, were there significant circumstances after the system? Did the nurse conceal the error and falsify the records? Let's say the answer to that is no. Then it goes on to the next question. Did the nurse disregard or consciously take a substantial risk? If the answer to that, it still falls into the reckless category. So let's say the nurse did not take a substantial risk. The answer to that is no. The question is there an employment history or of similar or serious errors by this nurse? If the answer is yes, the next question is, did the nurse previously receive employer remediation or counseling for a similar error? If the If the answer is yes, once again, we have a reckless nurse, somebody that has been counseled, has repeated mistakes, and falls into that category. Now, once again, there may be mitigating factors that you want to look at in the discipline process, but nevertheless, it gives you kind of a bucket, according to Just Culture, where this respondent might fall. So let's take the opposite path. Is there an employment history of similar or serious errors by the nurse? Let's say no, it's first time. Then the question is, could a reasonably prudent nurse have done the same in similar circumstances? And let's say the answer is no. Then that individual is at risk. So we say, once again, assess mitigating and aggravating factors. And the actions on this could include focused remediation, a reprimand, probation, suspension. Some boards of nursing have an alternative to discipline for practice program, something like that would fall into this category. And then we look at this again, but let's say a reasonably prudent nurse could have done the same under similar circumstances. That falls into the category of human error. And I'm sorry, chopping this up seems much more complex than it really is, because it kind of easily flows and you can get through it pretty quickly. But then it's human error. You can consider if action is warranted at all, but it could be a warning letter of concern, focused remediation, something like that, some type of counseling. So that's the algorithm in kind of a nutshell. So one of the things that obviously you look at is error accountability. Was it human error, at risk, reckless, or bad intent? And it helps you put them in each of those different pathways. So there are also mitigating and aggravating factors that you can look at. So did they knowingly create a risk for more than one patient? So was more than one patient involved? These are aggravating factors. Is it continuous? One after another act of misconduct? Was the act committed for personal gain or benefit? They helped someone with their will and they wrote themselves into it. Age, capacity, vulnerability of the patient. The patient was incapacitated. Obviously, they were really taking advantage of the situation. Sometimes you might want to consider experience and practice. So if it's what we would call a new graduate as opposed to a nurse that's experienced and should know better. Do they hold a leadership or mentor position? Have they had past facility discipline, or have they had other complaints to the Board of Nursing? So that would obviously weigh into your decision as to what you needed to do in terms of discipline. And then mitigating factors, was it an isolated event? Were there a lot of system issues, interruptions, chaotic environment, policies or procedures that were lacking or unclear, no past discipline or complaints, and acknowledgement of responsibility or accountability? So I've also been asked to tell you a little bit about the Redondo Voigt case. So I'm going to walk you through that case study and then show how that works with this disciplinary decision pathway. So a lot of you, I'm sure, know about this. That patient was admitted on December 24th to Vanderbilt University Medical Center and was diagnosed with a brain bleed. On December 26th, Redonda was employed by Vanderbilt as a help all nurse. So she didn't have her own caseload, but she assisted with other patients. Patient Jones was ready for discharge, and Redonda was assigned to help with that patient and take that patient for a PET scan. So, because that's a physician ordered that prior to discharge. So Redonda took the patient to the radiology department, and the radiology tech asked the nurse to obtain an order for Versed, and the primary nurse asked Redonda to take the patient down, but the tech called the primary nurse and said, get an order for Versed. The primary nurse obtained an order for 1 milligram of Versed ID for a PET scan, and the primary nurse asked Redonda to administer the drug. So the order was entered into the system by the physician at 2:45. The pharmacy verified the order at 2:49, but for some reason, and this is unclear to me about this, she needed to use the override function of the automatic dispensing cabinet. So I don't know why. Do you know the answer to that? What?
Because there was no Versed in the cabinet. It was under midazolam, and she did not know that midazolam and Versed were the same. It only listed it as a generic name. So when she put VE in, she got the first VE drug, which was zirconium.
Okay.
And
that has always been unclear to us as to why she had to override that function.
Yeah, and there had also been delays between pharmacy receiving the orders and approving them. And so overrides had become common. The patient had received 20 drugs on override in her 2-day stay in the ICU. So overrides in that unit were not uncommon.
And
So
that
you're
I
saying
knew.
the angel was asleep.
Yeah. Okay, so she overrides it. She takes a medication with the letters VE and removes it from the cabinet, reconstitutes the drug, and administers 10 milligrams of vecuronium. So she obviously did not verify the name of the drug. She reconstituted it with normal saline, and I think you probably know this better than me, but is it sterile water that's better for that? She administered it to the patient, and she immediately left the patient unattended, which it was policy, and it's to my knowledge, the policy in institutions that the nurse stays with the patient for 30 minutes after they administer Versed. Obviously, vecuronium would have the same requirements, but she didn't even know she gave that. So 30 minutes later, a patient was found unresponsive, CPR initiated. She was placed on life support. The primary nurse found the vial of vecuronium, asked Redonda if by mistake she could have given that. Redonda verifies that the mistake occurred. And initially, from what I was told from the Board of Nursing, the management kind of consoled her, sent her home, but she wasn't immediately terminated. Following the event, I don't know, several days or a week later, she was terminated. A complaint was filed with the Board of Nursing. The complaint to the Board of Nursing, to my knowledge, had few details and no mention of a patient death, and the board took no action. There was a whistleblower then that reported the incident to CMS. CMS did a grand inspection of Vanderbilt, found numerous safety violations, and another report was filed with the Board of Nursing. So she was, as you know, indicted for reckless homicide, a Class D felony, for knowing physical abuse or gross neglect of an impaired adult. The Board of Nursing charged her with unprofessional conduct, failure to maintain a record because she did not chart what she had given, and patient abandonment. The Board of Nursing revoked her license and gave her a fine of $1,000 for each violation. And then she went on to be convicted of gross neglect of an impaired adult, negligent homicide, and then she was acquitted of the reckless homicide. She was sentenced to 3 years supervised probation with judicial diversion, and the charges will be dropped and records expunged once probation is successfully completed. So now if we walk this case through here, the first question is, were the actions of the nurse intended to deliberately harm the patient? And the answer to that is no. I think there's no evidence that she wanted to do anything deliberate. Were there significant circumstances involving the system which contributed to the error? The answer is yes, although it was that these were all identified far before the Board of Nursing came to their conclusion. Did the nurse conceal the error or falsify the records? She really did not. Stop me if you're in disagreement, because we can have a discussion about this. But then we come to the question of, did the nurse disregard or consciously take a substantial risk? What do you think about that?
I think there's a lot more you didn't say about what was happening at that time. And I think that there's some people in the room that could probably elaborate more. And
Sure.
I would like them to do that if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely.
I think Barb has already alluded to one fact that the system was constantly on override. Like, it is a habit of a lot of people to override on the automated dispensing cabinet. And one of the other fact is that they have just implemented a new EHR, and it was not working well with the automated dispensing cabinet. So apparently there were delays in, even though the pharmacists will verify an order, because normally you won't be able to access the medication until the pharmacist has verified the order. And because there was a delay in transmitting that verified order into the automated dispensing cabinets, the nurses were told that they can just override to get the medications, because that's the only other way to get the medication out. Apparently, as far as I know, she actually removed the medication from the intensive care unit when she was coming down. So there was, in the intensive care unit, you could get vacuronium, but the question still is, why would vacuronium be an overridable drug? Because the system is supposed to be setting what drugs, like the pharmacy, the facilities, the Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee is supposed to set the standard of what drugs should be overridable. And in most of our opinion, vacuronium is not a drug that should be overridable. There's also the circumstances where in the intensive care unit, barcode scanning upon administration is something that has been in practice, but that same practice has not been carried over to radiology. So Barb and us, we were just talking about the fact that it is kind of like, I think, Barb, you can probably talk about that much better than I do, as far as like a pilot flying blind or manual.
Mary Ann, I want to thank you so much for bringing this case and sharing thought processes. There's a couple things I don't necessarily want to try to answer that question. I'll just say, Rita and I presented this case last year at IHI. So we were able to watch all of the facts that came out in the Board of Nursing hearing that is in the public domain, as well as the information that came back from the criminal trial, which we actually found to be really helpful. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But the truth is we don't know all of the facts. So when Vanderbilt made this decision to punish the nurse, it is possible that they had things about patterns of behavior and so forth that were never known to us. So I always feel really uncomfortable, saying, how would we judge her? But when we peeled out what it was we could identify, we could find 5 specific things, and it sounds like you found something similar, right, that would merit evaluation. And when we divorce those from this horrific outcome to say, well, what if they hadn't happened all in a row? What if we ask questions like, is it possible for other nurses to have made that human error? And Rita just made some, points about likely, yes, it was available. You could override it. The distraction that she had as she was carrying out this task, interacting with a preceptor or preceptee, I believe, we would just ask, was that normal? Are nurses distracted when they're withdrawing drugs all the time? Is that considered a big deal? Would the organization have taken action on that absent, this horrific outcome? So really, I don't want to go into details because I don't know enough to further comment. You may have, be able to run it to a satisfactory endpoint. I don't. The one thing though, I will say that was interesting about what came out as a result of the jury trial. If you remember when we talked about how criminal law bundles up everything under negligence, that just culture would separate into human error and at-risk behavior. And what was really interesting there is I can't imagine that the jury didn't have everything that was available. Certainly from Redonda's perspective, what would she have to hold back, right? Why wouldn't they put everything out there? She was charged with reckless homicide, meaning that she had conscious appreciation of substantial and unjustifiable risk. And a jury of her peers couldn't find that. They came back and said it was negligent homicide, meaning that she should have done things that she didn't do when she made human errors along the way. So in the model of just culture, we would not have found that to have been reckless knowledge or purpose, but would have said it's in the human error and at risk. And we think that the jury findings kind of substantiated that. Thank you for giving me the chance to weigh in.
So, what, and I think that we would agree with all of that, except for the fact that she left the patient's bedside. And that, I think, was the biggest mistake of all. I mean, it is hard to believe that you could go through all this and not once look at the bottle. But, I would not stand in judgment of that because who knows, anybody can make that type of error. But I think her biggest, where we would say she took a substantial risk, was leaving the bedside of that patient. And, the background of it is that she was out in the hallway talking to the preceptee about her vacation. So, that is, has factored majorly into this. And I think why the Board of Nursing took the action that they took. But, if you said no to that, then, we don't know if she's had other similar or serious errors. The answer to that is no. Let's say it's no. Let's say it's the first time she had the mistake. The question is, could a reasonably prudent nurse have done the same in similar circumstances and maybe given the wrong medication, but the walking away and leaving the patient thought you had given Versed to. That's for me, and I know for a lot of the boards, that is the significant issue here. Leaving the patient unattended after you have given a drug like that. So any other comments about it or?
And the question I had and just internally was, did the pharmacy not have some stake in this game too, in the fact that they were, they were prescribing brand names, dispensing generics? I would have to say that a lot of folks don't understand, what if you gave them Versed, would they know that it was midazolam? Or, when she looked at Vercuronium, did she think that was a generic name? Perhaps. I'm not saying she did, but it sets that opportunity up when you're dispensing. You're writing that, but it should be some way in there. Say, okay, Versed, midazolam, should have been probably on the order in some kind of way. And again, going back to the overrides and the delay in time between orders coming in and the pharmacy being able to supply, that was a system error too. This whole thing to me seems to be so much more of a system error. Granted, yeah, there were things that were done wrong by the individual and all too, but the system set her up for it, in my mind.
And the more I hear from all of you, I totally agree with that.
I have a microphone, but I don't want to miss out on the rest of your presentation. So mine can wait till the end.
Oh,
My question or
we're
comment.
close to the end here because
Okay.
I want to leave.
I just want to say one thing though about the, you're really pointing to the fact that she left the patient's bedside. And I want to read something to you that ISMP found through the documentation. And that is the nurse claims that she questioned the need for monitoring the patient and was told that monitoring was not required. Also, hospital policy did not require monitoring after Versed administration, and the drug was not mentioned in the moderate sedation policy or in the hospital's at-large high alert medication list.
I never heard that. Yeah. Another system error. Nikki, go ahead.
Okay. So a big difference between NCSBN or the nursing, the member boards and the NRBs, as we call them, the nursing regulatory boards, which are your members, and NABP and our member boards for pharmacy, is that we do license the facilities, right? So, I mean, first of all, that hospital and probably every hospital in the country is licensed with a board of pharmacy because they all have pharmacies. And in general, like in community practice, if we were to try to translate something like this to a community practice, all those facilities are regulated. And so I think in the previous presentation, we talked a little bit about facilities, but I wonder what NCSBN, like if that gray box up there is really important. And it says, communicate to the facility or employer regarding the significant system circumstances that contributed to the error. One of the big differences between what nursing regulatory boards can do and pharmacy boards can do is I feel like nursing regulatory boards are limited to just that, being able to communicate, where boards of pharmacy could really dig into that gray box right there, that part of it. And I almost wonder if the nursing regulatory boards had a wish, if they wish they could have made something stronger than a communication to the facility or the employer on how to fix it, because so many of the parts that are system related to this particular example that you're giving, the regulators in this room could actually do something about that.
Yeah. And so many times in our discussion, things come up that is a system issue. And a lot of times the nursing boards say, but we don't have control over that. When we originally designed this algorithm for at-risk and human behavior, well, I think it was for all three of them, it said that the nurse should develop a plan with the facility in order to determine how she or he is going to correct that problem and not have it happen again. So like a corrective action plan. And the board's feedback was, take that off. We can't require that because we have no control over the facilities. you know, I still say you have a control over the nurse. You can require the corrective action plan to keep coming to you from the nurse. But, you know, something other than a slap on the wrist, sometimes an actual action plan may be really helpful in this type of a case. But yeah, Nikki, you're exactly right. There's absolutely no interaction in the facilities in terms of a nursing board being able to say, this is a problem and you need to fix it.
I'm just going to chime in real quick. Joe Schnabel from Oregon said that if Vanderbilt had followed ISMP's medication safety best practices, a paralytic would never have been in the automatic dispensing.
This is just a tool that we have that actually that goes along with this. We were asked by CNOs and nursing managers to have this type of a tool themselves. It's a pathway where they can determine if they should report a nurse to the Board of Nursing. And we actually did a study on this and got great feedback. The boards really that participated in the study really liked it, not the boards, the facilities, and they said it was really helpful to them. So I'll leave it open now for any other questions, discussion, feedback. Well, this was a great presentation, and the fact that the presenter learned a lot from it as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Marianne, so much. I'm excited about that algorithm. I'm going to take it back and see what we can do with it in pharmacy. So thank you so much. And up next, we have Jeff Maceras.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Maceras, NABP Treasurer, a member of the Florida Board of Pharmacy. I'll be introducing our last speaker on what has been a very informative day. We thank you for the participation. Our last session this afternoon is ASHP Center of Excellence in Medication Use Safety and Pharmacy Practice. During this session, we will discuss ASHP's approach to enhancing medication safety in the practice of pharmacy. Speaking today is Douglas Sheckelhoff, Senior Vice President for the Office of Practice Advancement with ASHP. Doug?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, this is a little bit different type of presentation and discussion from what you heard earlier, and you'll see why in a minute. We do offer many resources, a lot of education around medication safety. We've worked closely with ISMP for many, many years around their best practices and are big believers and supporters. And in fact, the ISMP safe practices are very much incorporated within this new recognition, this new certification. So just one slide about ASHP in case you don't know about our organization. So ASHP is a membership organization, first and foremost. We have over 60,000 members. We do a lot of the usual membership things, a lot of networking. We have sections. We have a lot of resources on our website. We also try to provide leadership on professional issues, a lot of public policy advocacy that advances practice and safety and patient care. And really all of our advocacy is geared around those three things. We also publish practice standards and guidelines and have done so for the 75 or most of really the 75 years, almost 80 years of the organization. And back at the beginning of ASHP, part of the reason ASHP was established was because the American College of Surgeons had published a standard of what pharmacy should be in hospitals, and which didn't make a lot of sense that a group of surgeons would come up with that. And so ASHP spun off of another pharmacy organization that was broader to focus very much on not only standards of practice, minimum standards for hospitals, and we still publish a minimum standard document to this day, but also to address training for pharmacists that work in hospitals. And a lot of our residency training programs have grown from that need. publishing, drug information, books, our journal, AJHP, educational programs, the mid-year. Yeah, I'm sure that you've heard of. It's the first week in December and draws over 20,000 pharmacists, largest pharmacy meeting in the world. And then we have professional certificate programs, which I'll touch on just a little bit towards the end of the program. We also have board certification, prep courses. And then on the accreditation side, ASHP has accredited pharmacy residency programs and pharmacy technician programs for many years, pharmacy residencies for over 60 years. And there are now almost 3,000 accredited residency programs in the US. We also have some internationally. And then the new Center of Excellence certification, which I'll talk about today. So just an overview. I'm going to talk about the Center of Excellence, sort of the process and the standard and where it stands right now, what all goes into that. And then, as I mentioned, I'll touch just briefly on professional certificates and a bit on sterile compounding and 797. So I mentioned accreditation. These are the programs that we have. So PGY1 and PGY2, we have these programs mostly within acute care settings, but also within community pharmacies and managed care, specialty pharmacies type of settings, and a whole host of things. But a majority of them fall within hospitals. PGY2 programs are specialty programs. So after you have to complete a PGY1 before you can go on and specialize in critical care or oncology or whatever it might be. I mentioned international accreditation, and we have both international pharmacy practice residencies outside the US and international hospital pharmacy services accreditation. And we have probably 30 to 35 sites that are throughout the Middle East and Egypt, Pakistan, Spain, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, that are also that are accredited through one of those two programs. And then the last one, and the reason I included it with this list is really a recognition program, but it is very similar to accreditation in terms of how it's administered, and you'll hear a little bit more about that as I review the model. So we developed this program just in the last few years, and the reason why was a desire to have a model where those sites that have innovative, high quality pharmacy services could be recognized, and not only looking at the pharmacy services, but also the safe systems involved with medication use. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with the magnet recognition program that nursing has had for a number of years, going back to the mid-90s. There are about 600 hospitals or facilities that are recognized as magnet facilities, and it's been a very successful program. They've been able to show improved morbidity, mortality, safety if they achieve that magnet recognition, and many hospitals continue to seek and become recognized over time for magnet. And we had really a lot of interest and desire from our membership to develop sort of a similar model, and I would say similar, but again, focusing on pharmacy and medication safety. And so it does look at both medication use and pharmacy practice. And so it's a voluntary process. We have developed 12 primary areas, and we have a standard that was developed, and I'll go through that now. So the standard itself is, it's a pretty rigorous standard. It has almost 600 elements that are measured when we go in and do a survey of a hospital. And the standard itself is broken into 12 sections that fall into these three areas. So placement of the pharmacy department within the health system. So is pharmacy adequately resourced? Do they report through the C-suite? Are they positioned appropriately so that they can influence medication safety and provide improved outcomes through clinical services, pharmacist services within the hospital? Then there is also a number of standards that relate to the pharmacy department and pharmacy services. And those are probably many of the things that you would expect to see, and I'll go into a little bit more detail. And then the third section of the standard really focuses on the health system processes supporting safe medication use in pharmacy practice. So these are the 12 elements to the standard, the 12 domains. And so the first three, again, look at how pharmacy is positioned within the organization, where pharmacy reports and how it interfaces with other departments, team-based care, and leadership and management. The next 6 domains really focus on pharmacy services, the scope, and how well the pharmacy is managed and operated. And then the last 3 domains focus on medication use safety. And so a lot that relates to best practices, safe practices, but also safe use of technology and automation. So the process that a hospital would go through, they would reach out to us and express an interest. And again, it's a voluntary process. So they apply for this and go through this certification, this recognition program. They reach out to us. We describe what the model is. They sign a letter of agreement that basically says what they agree to do, what we agree to do as part of this, and they submit their application. There is a document assessment. And so there's a whole portion where we look at a lot of documents before we ever go on site. So things like policies and procedures and a whole host of things. And I'll give a few more examples in a moment. And then we go on site and we look again, we're evaluating 595 different elements when we go through this whole process to see if they are in compliance or are meeting that standard. Then they do receive a written report, and they hear what the initial findings are while the team is on site. It's usually a 4-day survey, and depending on the size of the organization, it can be anywhere from 2 people to 4 people, and they go to all the sites and have a very thorough review. And then as there are findings, the site has the opportunity to respond to those. And so sometimes, it may be that pharmacy is not on the medication safety committee. That would be unlikely that would be the case, but it might be something like that. And they say, that's something we can fix. We'll start, we're on it and we'll be attending next month. And so that's an easy thing to fix in terms of one of the standards. But then after they have had their findings, they've responded to those where they can fix it or will fix it. Then it comes back to, we have a pharmacy practice accreditation commission that reviews the findings, and they make a recommendation to our board of directors. And if they successfully make it through that process, then they get a 3-year term. And partly this is because it's a new type of accreditation or certification. I think over time, as this, over time, this will probably lengthen, and that typically is the case with these types of programs. So some of the documents that are reviewed, organizational charts, dashboards, scorecards, looking at quality data that they have that related to medications, how they describe their compliance with the standard data and other statistics, and then process maps and flow charts. And it really we're really looking for them to show, again, many of these standard elements, how they are providing medications safely. So this is an example of some of the standards, and you can see where the standard elements are listed in the second column from the left, but then, and then what the next to it is the document type. This is what they're looking for, the surveyors. And then you can see what the findings were. In this case, the chief pharmacy officer does not sit on the medical executive committee. And that is something that the pharmacy needs to be around the table as things like, say patient care and medication use are being described and things like that. So this is actually an example of one of the sites that was surveyed. And then the team goes through an on-site survey. They meet with various health system leaders. There are documents that are reviewed on-site that aren't sent electronically in advance, that are reviewed while they're there. Again, there's presentations, the discussion of process maps, things like that, and a very thorough tour of the facility, not only the pharmacy, but patient care areas, really any place where medications are stored, which are many. This also talks about the on-site survey. So the team meets with the hospital CEO when they first arrive, meet with pharmacy leadership, meet with chiefs of medicine, nursing, quality, safety, the P&T committee chair, the head of finance, meet with human resources, all the groups that are listed here. And they also come back in the evening shift. They come back on the night shift. They're coming back. They want to make sure that that standard of care and those processes are used regardless of the day or time of day. And then they also look at documents, as I mentioned, and they use process tracers. And I'll touch on a few of those in a minute. And then each day they debrief the pharmacy leadership on what the findings, what their observations have been thus far. And again, if there's clarification that's needed, that can happen while they're still on site. So they use a tracer methodology on different elements of the standard so that the site can really demonstrate or describe how they handle many of these different situations. And probably the best example is what they do when they have a medication shortage, which happens frequently. But in the hospital environment, the potential for an error if you run out of a medication is astronomical, partly because of the complexity of the system. So if you run out of drug A, and let's say you're fortunate enough to have an alternative medication, B, that maybe has a similar mode of action and it can be used as a substitute, but it's a different drug. You know, there's steps for communication with prescribers. There's the need to safeguard against a different dosing. Sometimes it's more concentrated or less concentrated than the original medication. You need to look at all protocols and order sets where that original drug was already included. Now you have to consider drug B has to be in all those. And if it's an oncology drug, it becomes very complex. You look at all of the automated dispensing cabinets where the drug was stocked, and now do you replace it with the new product? You need to make sure that the nurses are familiar with the new drug. All of those things have to happen. And so when they're on site doing a tracer, they'll have the site describe a drug shortage that they've had and the process they went through to make sure that they were able to continue to care for the patient, but to do so safely, and how they made sure that they did that. I mentioned the verbal report before they leave. They give a summary of their findings. They get a written report, and then within 30 days, and then they have the opportunity to comment. Maybe there's something that they were doing that was not understood or was not demonstrated while they were there, and they have the opportunity to respond. And so this is an example of where there were survey findings in the far left-hand column, what the standard was that it was in reference to, but then the action plan that was provided back from the site. And so, you know, how they're going to remedy the issue, whatever it might be. A lot of times it might have to do with training of staff and how they approach that. You know, just a whole host of things that might come up, but they always have the opportunity to comment and to take corrective action where it's possible to do so. So we have 4 sites that have been certified. The first one was the University of California, San Diego, and they were certified about a year ago. And then since then, we've had 3 additional hospitals that are listed here. The first 3 we had invited actually to apply for this because we wanted to work through the methodology to make sure that that it was, you know, the length of time for the survey was about right, and the types of documents were about right, and it allowed us to do a little bit of fine tuning. But we purposely wanted to include a smaller hospital. So University of California, San Diego is a very large system. And Legacy Salmon Creek is a 200-bed community hospital, and they were able to go through the process, and they were able to meet the standard and be recognized as such. And the University of Chicago was the most recent. We have probably another 30 hospitals that are in the queue that have expressed an interest and want to go through this process. So we have a lot more information on our website. The standard itself is there. All the detailed information from what I've described here today is there on our website. And you can find out things there, or you can reach out to me and I'll be happy to send you things or to answer questions that you might have. But while I'm here, I did want to mention just briefly professional certificates, because we have found that there's often a training need on a lot of different subjects, and we have now 30 different certificates, and you can see them here. We have one on medication safety that we do in collaboration with ISMP, but many other topics, and continually looking where there is a need. We have several certificates around sterile compounding, and the first one being what we call practical training and compounding of sterile preparations, and it's for either pharmacists or technicians, and it's very much for that frontline person who is that needs training and how to compound sterile preparations. And then the second certificate that's at the bottom is really, it's for pharmacists only, and it does prepare them for the BPS board certification in sterile compounding. And so it's at a different level. The first one has 24 hours of continuing education. The second one has 32. The first one does require that not only does the user need to pass a final exam, but they have to provide a video demonstrating their competence at handling sterile preparations, and that's reviewed by a subject matter expert from outside the organization after they've sent that in. And then one other, it's not technically a professional certificate, but I know that many states have different areas of pharmacist-initiated therapy, and so we will be launching a micro-credential product in April that'll focus on ambulatory respiratory infections, HIV pre and post exposure prophylaxis, and continuous glucose monitoring. And this will continue to grow over time. That it's designed to be something that can be expanded, and additional information, different types of therapies can be added. And then just the last thing I'll mention, 797 with November 1st looming. We have a lot of interest from our members, and we're trying to help them assess their readiness for 797 and 795 and the other USP standards. But we have a number of resources that are being posted on our website probably this week or next. I think one area of particular interest is around the requirement of having a designated person, and what those requirements are, and what that person's training should be, and what their responsibilities are. And so we have a document that'll help people in that regard. Also a crosswalk of a lot of the changes from the previous version, or the current version, I guess, and the one that'll become effective November 1st. And with that, I will do my best to get us back on schedule. I know the train runs on time. So are there any questions around about the Center of Excellence or some of these other resources? I think one of the things that has come up is the complexity of medication use, and within health systems, and we track a lot of these key elements. 98% of hospitals have automated dispensing. That's almost universally used. Electronic health records are used in over 95% of hospitals. Barcoded medication administration used in over 95% of hospitals. So those systems are in place, but people still, there are ways to bypass those systems. Sometimes they're not used to the full extent that they could be. The Vanderbilt example was, showed where there were pitfalls within those systems. And so the intent with this is to really identify those safe practices and to for those systems that have been able to demonstrate that they follow those safe practices and best practices to have that level of recognition. So,
Nikki?
Thank you for your presentation. Couple quick questions. Any center of excellence type, maybe not a certificate program, but any center of excellence type resources for regulatory boards?
That's something that we have, we've talked about, because a lot of what we have could very easily be adapted because, that general knowledge. I think the certificate programs could serve as a very good foundation, but then, there may be something that's additional in terms of, looking at it through that lens of a regulator and considering what the expectations are. And so our practice standards are aligned in that regard, and our certificates certainly could serve in that capacity. So it hasn't been designed specifically for that, but easily could be adapted.
Okay, I'll send you back home with the same message I sent ISMP, like help us out here, us regulators. So, a lot of the board members are frontline folks, or, some of them are in education, and they have a very varied backgrounds amongst board members. And then there's the people in this room who are mostly state government employees who probably have some background somewhere in pharmacy, but now their full-time gig is to try to wrap their heads around this and then try to help their board members wrap their heads around the best approach. My other question, hope it didn't just go out of my head.
Well, and to that point,
got it.
And, even if someone practiced in a hospital setting 10, 15, 20 years ago, it's really evolved a lot. I had a friend of mine that I went to school with many years ago, and he had worked for the pharmaceutical industry and went through a downsizing, and he reached out and he goes, I want to go back into hospitals. What do you recommend? And I'm like, it's a different world than what you saw 20 years ago. It's a very different
Did you
world.
say the NABPlex?
Yeah.
We actually had that. We had a person come out of, got downsized out of corporate.
Yeah.
I've had 280 pharmacists reporting to me. When's the last time you practiced? 25 years ago. You need to take the NABPlex.
Yeah.
No, my question was around, I'm sure as our board of pharmacy for sure has looked to our hospitals as the place, the resource for us to go when we were trying to kind of figure out how to do this. We look at our hospitals because we know they have, or our health systems because we know they have quality assurance committees. We know they have root cause analysis. We know they have P&T committees and sentinel event committees. And we felt like Just Culture was strongest, or sometimes I call it culture of safety because I found out there's actually a real live company named that. And I don't want to be using proper nouns when I should be using generic nouns. So the culture of safety idea, we thought, well, we'll look to our hospitals, but and I hate to pick on the Vanderbilt case because I think that it just happens that it's in the news and so everybody knows about it. But the errors happen in health systems and they happen in outside of health systems all the time. It's just that one got the most notoriety. But what have you seen in health systems that talk the talk, but maybe don't walk the walk? I felt like I heard some of that, like, oh yeah, we have a culture of safety approach until you don't, and I think there's something to be said about the societal pressures on regulatory bodies, but what about walking the walk after you talk the talk?
So, and again, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but errors can happen in any place, and it can be the number one hospital, U.S. News and World Report, they still have errors. And so, and I think the Just Culture adoption of that and application of that varies quite a bit. And I'm sure Rita, as you guys, as ISMP goes into many of these different settings, you find that to be the case. I do know medication safety at like our big meetings and so forth, that is one of our top attended programs. And so, ISMP always has a session. People want to know what those best practices are. They want to hear about it. And that and the Joint Commission session are always, some of the biggest sessions that we have. We have the medication safety certificate, again, probably one of our top selling programs, that and the sterile compounding. So people want to adopt these practices and do the right thing. I think that sometimes, they don't always have, I think this Center of Excellence program is actually a good way to have another set of eyes come in and look at what you're doing. And we found that over the years with our residency accreditation, that when a residency is accredited, there's 6 elements to the standard, and 5 out of the 6 are around the training program and the qualifications of the preceptors and the practice environment, all that kind of stuff about training. But the 6th standard is about pharmacy services. And it results in, again, it's having another set of eyes come in, but it's somebody who's really knows what they're looking for. They know what a good pharmacy program looks like. And so there's a lot of consultative recommendations and a lot of improvements in medication safety and patient safety that come out of that. Even though it's focused on the residency training, it results in improved pharmacy services and elevated practice. The Joint Commission comes in, but the amount of time that they're spending in the pharmacy and things, it's limited because they're covering the entire hospital. But this is a much more focused. So having a well-qualified, somebody who really can provide that consultative advice on their systems can be a big help.
Hi, it's Donna. I just wanted to say that you have so much information, so much education that you can provide to the boards of pharmacy that I'm wondering if the people who finish the certificate program or your residents, if they would be willing to serve, if you could bring that into the program, would they be willing to serve as subject matter experts when the boards have that need to know more about what is RCA, what is CQI, what is the medication use system supposed to look like, all of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we just have to figure out how to best do that. I mentioned some of the data, some of the statistics we measure. We do a survey of a sampling of all hospitals in the country every year. And we've done it going back to 1958, but every year since 1999. So we have tons of information on what the practices are, and we include safe practices and best practices in those questions. So we know what people are doing and what they're not doing. And so I think, but certainly we could provide that type of information. All right. I knew it was risky being the last thing between you and dinner. So,
well, thank you, Doug. Let's thank Doug for his great presentation. And now President Reggie will now provide closing comments.
Indeed, I will. Now, thank you all. I thought this was a really, really, really good day. Thank you all for your comments. I thank you all for your interaction, both here and at home or wherever they're at, somewhere out there in virtual land. But now I want to give a special thanks to our moderators and to our speakers for their job today, because they were all bringing us interesting topics and things that we all need to hear and need to ponder and think about. But before we close the working portion of the day, I guess, as opposed to the party portion of the day, thank you all again for your hard work and your dedication to this profession and to what you're doing as regulators out there and protecting the public health. So, being here today shows me your commitment, and I commend you for all that. And on behalf of the executive committee and NABP, and give yourselves a pat on the back, and I applaud you all.